Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
For most modern people, charity sounds like something that stars and very famous people do. For Victoria, charity was a hobby, a way to find her place in life, and also just a necessity. In her spare time after work and on weekends, she would go to the charity. She was sure to buy some cheap books from grandmothers near the subway, constantly giving money to beggars. Her young man Dennis did not share her desire to help everyone. He rather treated Victoria's hobby indifferently and believed that in time it would pass. He constantly explained to the girl that money should not appear out of nowhere and everyone is capable of earning it themselves. Dennis was sure that any beggar, any homeless person could take his life in his own hands and become a successful person. That Sunday, Victoria, as was her custom from the morning, went to the charity sale. She walked between rows of chaotically scattered items. One woman laid homemade knitted sweaters directly on the pavement, another spread out books on a bench. Girl, buy a volume of Chekhov. Offered her a man who looked like an elderly scientist from a sci-fi movie. I'd be happy to, Victoria said and reached into her purse for her wallet. How much is it worth? It's priceless. Of course, Chekhov is a great writer, but I ask you, how much do you want for this book? Smiled the girl. 30, how much is not a pity. I have only 300 rubles with me. That will be enough. It's quite a lot for such a small book. The man gave her the purchase and took the money. And what exactly are you raising money for? We have our own little shelter for stray dogs. The elderly man answered her in a very well-pitched voice. My wife and I opened it together, and now we have only 10 guests. Last year we had about 20, but we managed to place half of them. Wow, that's lucky. So many dogs have found new owners and are now happy at home. That's the only reason I sell books here. My wife and I don't need much. We have our own vegetable garden. We don't need food or clothes. Victoria handed the man another bill. Take it. You're doing a good deed, and surely you and your wife need something too. You don't need to spend all your money, all your energy just on animals. Thank you. You're very kind. And may this book bring you good luck. He packed Chekhov's volume in a bag and handed it to Victoria. The girl walked to the end of the flea market and was disappointed to find that she had spent all her cash. She would have liked to help everyone in need, and it was very unpleasant to admit that now she didn't have that opportunity. As luck would have it, she was approached by a very nice elderly lady who was selling homemade mittens. Young lady, look at my brightly colored mittens, she said. Very nice, Victoria nodded. I make them myself and sell them, with the proceeds going to a fund to help pensioners. It's a very good deed, and they cost only 200 rubles a pair. That's really a very good price for them. I would have given 500 rubles for them, but I ran out of money today. I'm sorry. That's all right. Come back next time, the saleswoman said very insincerely. Already leaving the market, Victoria felt terrible. Even though she had managed to help the pet shelter, she still felt sorry for that poor old lady. Her kind heart was trying to help everyone. But Dennis must have already gone home and was sitting there alone. She quickened her step to ignore the vendors distracting her from all sides. The airport had already announced boarding for the flight to Vladivostok. Victoria helped her young man with his bags while he searched for his boarding pass. When all the documents were found, Dennis sat down on the iron chair next to his girlfriend. Everything is ready, he said, relieved. You're too nervous. I don't fly airplanes that often to get used to all this craziness. There are so many people here. We found the check-in counter for now. I almost changed my mind about going. How can you do this? Your mom's there. We should go see her, Victoria said. Where's my passport? Dennis suddenly realized. It's in my hands, Victoria showed him the burgundy cover. Try to relax and enjoy the trip. Maybe you'll feel better on the airplane when you land. Will be sure to text me. I'll be very worried. The girl stroked her boyfriend's back affectionately. I don't trust these airplanes. Come on, don't think bad thoughts. But I'll set a festive table for your return. That would be nice. What are you going to do while I'm gone? The usual, work. I'm going to a charity auction tomorrow. They'll be selling crafts from the boarding school kids. Maybe I'll buy something. Just don't overdo it with your charity work, because I know how you do it. First, you want to buy one little trinket made at the boarding school, and then you put a large sum of money into it. I have the right to do that. That's what I'm in my business for, to give some of the money to those who need it more. What makes you think they need the money more than you do? Dennis asked in bewilderment. I'll take you to an event like this sometime, and you'll discover a lot of new things. From the voice from the loudspeaker again invited those who were about to fly to Chicago to board. Dennis perked up, grabbed his bag, and put all the documents in his jacket pocket. That's it. I'm off. Please don't worry. But Victoria hugged her boyfriend. The plane won't leave without you. Take your time. Then where do passengers come from who hastily buy a ticket right before the flight? They missed the previous flight. You watch too many movies, Victoria laughed. Come on, don't miss me. Dennis kissed her tenderly and went to the baggage claim. Victoria looked at him enviously. She would have liked to go somewhere else, but she had to stay home and do her business. She had started it as a student. At that time, it seemed to her that at most, she would be able to work part-time at it. But time went on, the number of clients grew, the consultations paid more, and she accumulated a good amount of money in her account. At first, she was completely satisfied with working individually with each client. And when there were more clients, she had to open a whole office and hire additional staff. Now, the staff of her private psychological center was 10 people. In addition, she was still doing regular counseling herself. Dennis had always supported her and helped her in the most difficult times. It was thanks to him that the business was still alive and even thriving. The guy himself worked much less than his girlfriend. He was the head of a small sales department. When Victoria began to earn more than him, at first he did not even know how to feel about it. He should have been happy for his favorite girl, but had to worry about his own worthiness. It took about a year before he realized that Victoria didn't expect any financial achievements from him, but only wanted him to be a kind and understanding man by her side. When Dennis passed through the metal detector and disappeared into the long corridors of the airport, Victoria sighed heavily and walked to the train station. She didn't drive and preferred to use public transportation. The electric train stopped at the station. It was the final station, and all passengers had to leave the cars. As Victoria passed the man sitting closest to the exit, she noticed that he had fallen asleep, where she shook him lightly by the shoulder and said softly, "Sir, we're here." "What?" He didn't understand at first. "You fell asleep, and we have already arrived at the final station. Now everyone needs to get out of the carriages." The man looked around in bewilderment and suddenly came to his senses, fumbled for his things. "Thank you so much for waking me up. I'm on my way back from a business trip after a night flight, and, it's no big deal. It happens to everyone," Victoria said, helping the man up and out. "You have very kind hearts. Thank you very much and goodbye." The man waved goodbye and disappeared into the crowd. Vicky mentally commended herself for doing a good deed. She really couldn't understand why all the other people just walked past him. It seemed natural for her to help someone in need. With a great mood, she walked out of the station building. The girl was suddenly called out by a man's voice. Vicky turned around, thinking it was the man from the train who forgot something. But to her surprise, a homeless man in a very dirty coat stood next to her and held out his hand. "What can I do for you?" Vicky asked. "Borrow some money. I feel sorry for him," the man asked. "I'm sorry I don't have any cash," Vicky said. She turned around and wanted to go to the bus stop, but something stopped her. After thinking for a while, she came to the conclusion that she felt guilty about having to turn the man down. She looked around for an ATM to make a quick withdrawal, but didn't see one. Sighing heavily, she turned back to the homeless man. "I have a sandwich from yesterday," she said, and pulled a bag of food out of her bag. It'll be good too." "I haven't eaten a proper, home-cooked meal in a long time." The homeless man was happy and snatched the bag from her hands. "I can't imagine how you live here. Right on the street and without any amenities." "In a situation like mine, amenities are the last thing on your mind," he said, and took a greedy bite of his sandwich. "Did something happen to you?" Vicky asked. "Girl, nobody just happens to be on the street for no reason. Everyone you see here would like to sleep in a warm bed tonight and eat dinner cooked by his wife, but they have to spend the night at the train station. It's very sad and unfair." What happened to you that you had to live on the street? Yes, I had a bad life from the very beginning. First, my mother started drinking heavily. Then, when I was 6, I was put in an orphanage. I feel awfully sorry for you, Vicky said very sincerely. I don't really appreciate people feeling sorry for me. It's just the way life is. I'm just like everyone else around me, but they look down on me. Is that fair? Oh, they just can't put themselves in your shoes. Oh, girl, I'm really young. How do I look? Vicky looked at the homeless man's face and had a hard time estimating his age. He didn't have many wrinkles, but the skin around his eyes was already showing some wisdom. His swollen face told me that he often abused alcohol. I'd give you about 45 years, the girl said. Wow, I'm usually a little under 40, but how old am I really? Are you 33? I'm sorry if I offended you. You didn't offend me, just upset me, just a couple years ago. I thought I had it all ahead of me and everything could end well. But now every day I realize that maturity is coming, and soon it will be old age. And what can I do about it? Everyone can do something with their life. Don't give up on yourself. Vicky encouraged him, but she herself had little faith in her own words. I'm actually a talented artist. I don't doubt it. Now you've definitely lied to me. I can see it in your eyes. You want to finish talking to me as quickly as possible and go about your business. I can understand that. If I were you, I wouldn't want to talk to someone like me either, said the bum. But you misunderstood me. Vicky started to defend herself. Go home, the man said with a wave of his hand. But your husband and children are probably waiting for you there. You're wrong. I'm not married and I don't have children yet, and I'm in no hurry today. Can you do me a favor? Of course, Victoria answered gladly. And then she wondered what this homeless man could ask of her. Don't worry, I won't ask anything terrible, as if reading her thoughts reassured the homeless man. Lately I have a little health problems, and they won't let me go to the clinic. I have an insurance policy. Honestly, I can show it to you. I believe you, Victoria said. What happened to you? I don't feel comfortable talking about it with a girl I don't know. No matter how I look, I'm still a man. If you could take me to the clinic and help me talk to the doctor, you'd be a great help. Sure, let's go. It's not far. The homeless man took the girl's hand. When else will I meet such a kind and understanding girl? You said yourself that you have no plans. It won't take more than 20 minutes, I promise. They walked for a while and stopped at the clinic building. The man hesitantly let Victoria go through. She entered and immediately addressed the girl at the reception desk. Good afternoon. We need to see a therapist. On what date should I make an appointment for you? We need now. I'm not sure if there's any free time right now. I need to check. The girl quickly looked at the computer and smiled. Yes, there is half an hour free right now. What's your name? Victoria turned to the homeless man. He came up quickly. The girl at the front desk wrinkled her neck. Could you wait outside? She asked the homeless man. He can't leave. He needs to see a doctor, not me, Victoria explained calmly. I don't think they'll accept him. We only accept people with papers. But I have everything with me, the homeless man said, and handed the girl neatly folded papers. She squeamishly took them and examined them. Among the documents there was indeed a policy, so it was impossible to refuse him. Go to the second floor, the 21st office. It's immediately to the right. Thank you. Victoria thanked him cheerfully and helped her new acquaintance to put on shoe covers. The appointment did not last long because the doctor was also unpleasant to be in the same room with a bad-smelling person. The homeless man was prescribed ointment and advised to take tests. Leaving the clinic, the man looked at Victoria with gratitude. Permission to walk you home. It's not necessary at all. It was my pleasure to help. Anyway, I live far away from here in another neighborhood. I have no plans for the weekend except to buy this ointment, the homeless man laughed. Do you have money? Do you have enough for the medicine? Really? Victoria asked. It's nothing. I'll stand outside the church for a couple hours. Maybe someone will give me some money for the medicine. If I could help, I would. But I have all my money on my card and there's no address here. You've been very helpful. I'm used to begging. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, that won't do, Victoria said firmly. We'll go to my house together. I'll feed you a warm, home-cooked dinner, and on the way I'll buy you this ointment. The homeless man's eyes shone with happiness, and he became 10 years younger. "What is a holiday for you is a normal day for others," the girl said. "Let's go to the bus." At first, the man behaved insecurely in the transportation because everyone shunned him. But gradually, he relaxed because next to him sat such a beautiful girl whom he had not seen for many years. Before entering the entrance with a new acquaintance, Victoria hesitated. He noticed this and grinned to himself. "You shouldn't do that," he said. "Oh no, it's not difficult for me at all. I can see you're hesitating. No, it's very important to me to help other people." She opened the entrance door, went up to the second floor and entered her apartment. Victoria bought this apartment with the proceeds from his business. Her parents were from a small town and didn't understand the beauty of living in New York City. She could not move them to the capital because they liked to live there, where the rhythm is calmer. But for herself, she clearly decided that as soon as she moved to New York, immediately began to save for real estate. Just in those years, to buy an apartment was for her almost unattainable dream. She wasn't sure if she could make it happen. As time went on, her business grew and the profits became quite serious. Buying an apartment became a matter of time. She did the renovation herself, without involving designers. Victoria had excellent taste and she could order furniture from abroad and from the best American craftsmen. When the homeless man entered her apartment, he immediately appreciated the furnishings. "You have a great life," he said. "Thank you. You can take off your street clothes here and go to the bathroom. If you need to, that would be just fine. I haven't bathed since the beginning of the year. How can you live like this?" "In the winter, it's very hard to find any body of water. In the summer, I like to bathe almost every day. But when it's cold, I don't want to go in the water. And it's a problem to dry wet clothes." "I didn't realize how difficult your life is." Victoria waved her hands. "It's nothing. People rarely think about people like me in our lives. I'm going to go to the bathroom, but not for long." Victoria handed him a towel and picked up the dirty clothes. They smelled disgusting. She didn't dare to put them in the washing machine. She didn't want her laundry to smell the same after a few more washes. She saw a few torn buttons on his shirt and decided to look for similar ones at home when the homeless man came out of the bathtub. She had already sewn his buttons back on, which hid the holes on his sleeves. "Oh, how nice it felt to wash in warm water. Bliss," said the man. "And the light steam. I've just subdued your clothes a little. Perhaps some of my boyfriend's clothes will fit you. I'll be right back." Victoria opened the closet and found a lot of things that Dennis didn't wear anymore. He'd probably forgotten about them. If she gave them to this poor man, the guy wouldn't even notice. She looked through the bag lying in the corner. It contained an old tracksuit, a few t-shirts, and some very old sneakers. "Maybe some of these will fit you. He's got a real fortune. What size are you?" "I don't know. I'll try these sweatpants on." He also had some kind of sweater. Victoria wanted to go into the bedroom and look, but the man stopped. "You're already too good to me. You are truly a good woman and very beautiful." "Thank you," Victoria was embarrassed. By the way, we never met. My name is Roman." "I'm Vika. Nice to meet you." "Oh, do you have any pies?" Roman glanced at the table and completely forgot about his attempt to meet the lady of the house. Vika was pleased with his interest in food. "These are with cabbage, and there are some with apples. Which do you like better?" "Cabbage and apples." "I just now realized how hungry I am," he said the man, and took a pie. "Let's have dinner." "I'd like that. I cook to my taste. I hope you eat potatoes with stew, cabbage. That's my favorite meal." "Well, have a seat. I'll just warm it up a bit. In the meantime, I'll pour you some tea." Vika woke up in the morning with the light falling directly on her face. Victoria realized with horror that she had no memory of what had happened the previous evening. The last thing she was able to reconstruct in her mind was how they had dinner with Ronald. Then she'd offered him a drink, and after the first one, she'd passed out. The clock read 7:00 a.m., so about 8 hours had fallen out of her memory. God only knows what was going on during that time. Victoria had never had a problem with alcohol and couldn't fall asleep from one glass of wine. It all seemed very suspicious. She looked around and froze in horror. The very homeless man was lying in bed next to her and sleeping peacefully. He was completely naked. The things Victoria had packed for him lay neatly on the table. His old clothes were nowhere to be seen. Perhaps he had gotten rid of it. how had he ended up in her bed? She strained her memory, but it wasn't helping. Wake up. She shook Ronald. What happened? How did you get here? You don't remember it? I remember coming to your house and having dinner. But now I mean how I ended up in your bed. At your invitation. And by the way, we've been on a first-name basis for a while now. What a headache. Victoria rubbed her temples and looked around the room. So uncomfortable. Everything is fine. Nothing to worry about. But what about... I don't know what you'll think of me. I don't usually get drunk enough to invite men I don't know into bed. I don't think anything of you. I'm completely naked. How embarrassing. Victoria found her pajamas on the floor and tried to put them on under the blanket. Don't worry so much. I understand. Your boyfriend left and you got bored. I'm not judging. It was a complete accident. So you don't like me? How insolent is that? Victoria didn't know what to say right away. I just thought you were in a romantic mood last night, so I agreed. Agreed to what? Well, this. There really was something going on between us. Victoria shrieked hysterically and jumped back. From Ronald? This can't be happening. I just went to bed. I couldn't do that. I'm not that kind of woman. You don't have to judge yourself for it. I won't tell anyone. You're very beautiful and kind, and you helped me. And then you made me feel so welcome at your house. Believe me, I'll take everything that happened with me to my grave. Don't lie to me. Nothing happened between us, Victoria suddenly screamed. But I'm not lying. Please, you can leave now. What? Why not? Ronald threw up his hands. Because I'm asking you to. This is the first time I've ever been in this situation, and I don't know what to do. You're a grown man and you can do what you want. But not with a bum, Victoria blurted out. She suddenly realized that it was too rude and might offend Ronald. The man got out of bed and began to dress. There were many bruises on his body. He had obviously been malnourished lately. Victoria felt both sorry for him and frightened by the situation. He pulled himself together and silently left. In despair, Victoria called her friends. Are you awake? I even wonder what woke you up so early. Unexpectedly cheerful, replied her friend. I have such a situation here that I don't even know how to begin to explain it. We'll start from somewhere. A. I have to take Greg to the garden, and I'm driving soon. You've literally got 10 minutes. I woke up in bed with a man I've known for less than 24 hours. Wow, my friend laughed. So you had a really good time. Up all night wallpapering. Are you kidding me? Imagine what it's like to sleep with a man you just met at the train station. I can, except I did it when I was 18, not 28. So you think it's okay? She's calmed down a bit. If it's something you both wanted to do, there's nothing wrong with it. Dennis doesn't need to know that. Don't ruin the relationship with some passing fling. Be a wise woman. The problem is, I don't even remember what it was like. I had wine last night. That's how it happens. I gotta run. We have a board meeting at work first thing in the morning. Bye, darling. And don't worry about a thing. Anna hung up the phone. Victoria walked around the room and checked that everything was in place. There were 2 unwashed plates and 2 glasses of wine in the kitchen. She picked up her glass and suddenly thought that the drink had some too strange odor. She smelled the wine in the bottle, and it smelled different. It was spiked, Victoria suddenly realized. The thought made her sit helplessly in her chair and cry. The whole day Victoria was not herself. Dennis noticed the obvious change in her and tried to find out what was wrong. She kept saying it was just his imagination, even though she was sadder than usual. Dennis didn't want to be too intrusive. His girlfriend was prone to frequent mood swings, but he couldn't just stand idly by. Mikey, fix. Why don't we talk about what's going on? Oh, it's all right. I've known you a long time. You always pretend everything's fine. Even when you're in pain. I'm not in pain. I'm just making an example. You've been so sad since I got back from LA. He put his arm around her and tried to look into her eyes, but she looked away. There's a lot going on at work. I'm tired and I probably need a vacation, the girl replied indifferently. If you say so, then let's go somewhere and have a vacation. Oh, I don't want to go anywhere. I just need to stay at home and get away from everyday problems. Victoria finished breakfast and began to collect dirty plates to put them in the dishwasher. The girl no longer had the energy to bear and hide her problem. She threw the plates back on the table and burst into tears. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Dennis immediately ran up to her and put his arm around her waist. "Nation, I have to tell you something. I knew you were in trouble. Tell me whatever it is you're going through. I promise to help. I've been feeling kind of sick lately, weak, dizzy, and nauseous from smells." "Well, let's go to the doctor," Dennis suggested. "I've already been to the doctor." "No. What did he tell you?" "No, I'm pregnant," whispered Victoria and fell on her boyfriend's shoulder, sobbing. "That's great." Dennis pulled her against him. "Don't you want a baby?" Victoria wiped her tears and thought for a moment. I don't know. It's just been so overwhelming lately. I'd like to have children. I wish we'd never talked about it before. I'd like to have a son." Dennis took her face in his hands and wiped away her tears. Would you? "Well, of course, darling. I'd be very happy to have a baby. You have no reason to worry. On the contrary, you should be happy. You and I are going to have a complete family." Victoria opened her mouth to talk about the night she'd spent with the homeless man 4 weeks ago. But something silenced her. She decided to put that confession off for another time. After all, if the baby was going to look like Dennis, why would she even want to tell him about it? It wouldn't make things better for her or him. "Have you told your parents yet?" "No, just my best friend Anna. She knows everything about me." "What do you think about you and me getting married?" "I think it's a good idea. A baby needs both a mother and a father. Are you ready?" Dennis looked very carefully into the face of his beloved and saw doubts there. "I was so worried that it didn't even occur to me that you and I should get married. And now that I've mentioned it, do you feel doubts?" Victoria answered honestly. "Let's give each other time to think. After all, the baby is not going to appear right away. Don't rush into a decision." They laid down on the couch in front of the TV, and Victoria turned on a movie. She stared at the screen and couldn't understand what was happening. The situation with the homeless man kept replaying in her mind. Did they really have something going on? Or was this baby from Dennis after all? When her boyfriend proposed to her, Victoria was surprised and happy and didn't know how to answer him. At the same moment, it seemed unfair to her to deceive her lover. Suddenly, this child is not from him. While the movie was going on, Victoria all the time agonized over this dilemma, and as a result decided not to tell Dennis and build a family with him. 6 years passed. During this time, Victoria gave birth to a beautiful daughter, Milani. She and Dennis started a family and lived together in her apartment. The girl looked so much like her mother that one would have thought she had inherited nothing at all from her father. She had the exact same thick hair, bright brown eyes, and big lips as her mother. Victoria exhaled a sigh of relief when she realized that Dennis had no questions about his paternity. Dennis proposed to her as they strolled along the boardwalk. He simply got down on his knee in front of her and asked her to be his wife. And the people around them started applauding. It was one of the most romantic moments in their lives because they trusted each other completely and were sure of their future. A month after their wedding, Milani was born. The girl grew up a beautiful, curious child, did not give her parents almost any trouble. The only thing that Dennis and Victoria argued about was the education their daughter was to receive. The girl saw a creative streak in the girl and wanted her to develop it. Dennis strictly believed that the financial university would allow the girl to lead an independent life in the future. Milani herself was too young to get involved in her parents' arguments. She loved to walk and paint. "Mommy, buy me more paints." The girl tugged Victoria's sleeve as they passed a stationery store. "You have lots of paints at home. I'm out of blue. Mix blue and white, and you'll have blue." Denise sternly rebuked his daughter's whining. "It won't be as blue as I want it to be." "It's a waste of time to paint," Dennis said. "The child should be interested in math. It's good for her future." "You talk about money when it's a hobby." Victoria was outraged. "It's not like she's asking you to buy her a car. The child just needs new paints, and it doesn't cost only 300 rubles. Then buy it yourself." "I'll buy it." Victoria took her daughter by the hand, and together they went with her to the store. "I'm not going to save on the child's childhood. That's what it's for, to try everything you want. When else will she be able to paint at university or maybe when she gets a job? If all she does is paint, she'll never get a job. At least not a proper one, Dennis turned away resentfully and looked at art books. Melanie really did draw a lot. And in kindergarten, her artwork had even been on display. Her father hadn't paid any attention to it. It's not like there was anything on display at the kindergarten art show at that age. It's impossible to do anything conscious. And Victoria was absolutely delighted with her daughter's talent. And she often stayed for tea with the teacher to see everything her daughter had drawn during the day. "Can I still get a paperweight?" Millie asked and immediately met her father's approving gaze. "Of course you can," Victoria said. "You can't keep the child completely occupied. She won't have time for thinking, for math." "Give me a break with your math," Dennis said. "You'll remember my words 10 years from now. We don't have a child like that. She's a creative girl." "That's exactly why we need to take the time now to instill in her a love of science," Dennis continued to argue. "Millie, do you want to do math?" Victoria squatted down and held her daughter's hands. "Not really," the child grumbled. "What do you want to do?" "I want to walk to school with Valerie." The girl answered with childlike directness. "There you go. If she does whatever she wants to do, it won't end well." Dennis laughed. They left the store. The girl kept smiling and hugging the new package of gouache. Her parents were silent. Dennis did not understand his daughter's desire to engage in such nonsense as he considered drawing. He himself was an extremely pragmatic man, fond of numbers and precision in everything. His wife was a determined woman with a strong character, but she didn't have the strong creativity that their daughter Millie had. "What kind of person does she look like?" Dennis suddenly asked. "Probably you." "She doesn't look like me at all, neither in appearance nor in character," Victoria answered. "Do you think so?" She was worried. "She has your nose, and she laughs just like you." "I never noticed," Dennis said thoughtfully and looked at Millie. Dennis came home and slammed the door loudly. Victoria and her daughter flinched. They were sitting in the kitchen at that moment, framing the girl's new artwork to hang in the living room. "Emily, go play in the room." "I need to talk to Mommy alone," Dennis said. "But we haven't finished yet." The girl tried to object. "Do what they say." Dennis raised his voice and the girl ran frightened into her room. "Are you yelling at the child?" Victoria was indignant. "Because you should listen to your father. You have become some kind of domestic tyrant. It's not a big deal. You and I need to have a serious talk right now." "Okay," chuckles. "But you didn't have to scare the kid to do it. What did you want to talk about?" "In this." Dennis pulled out a stack of papers and handed them to Victoria. "And what are these?" "Take a look for yourself." "Dennis, I've been at work all day dealing with documents. By the end of the day, I can't even look at them. Can you please tell me what happened?" "Please." He pulled out one sheet of paper and put it in front of his wife. "Genetic expertise." She read the headline. "What the hell is that?" "It's exactly what it says here. I went to the clinic and had a genetic analysis." "For God, I thought only TV programs did such stupid things." Victoria laughed. "It wasn't even stupid at all. I've learned a lot of new things. Remember when I told you that Millie didn't look like me? Now I know why. It turns out that she is not my daughter at all." Dennis pointed to the table where it was written that the probability that she and the girl are related is less than 1%. "Maybe you can explain it to me somehow." And he looked angrily at his wife. "Such tests are wrong." Victoria shrugged her shoulders. All these years, the girl was afraid that her husband would guess sooner or later. But now she had no choice but to continue lying to the... "It's okay, they're not wrong. They assured me at the clinic that everything is right here." "Vic, what's going on?" "I'd like to know what's going on with you and me." To hide her nervousness, the girl went to the window. She had tears in her eyes, which she tried to hide from her husband. "Tell me the truth. Millie is not my daughter. This is all nonsense." "I believed you, but now even I don't know what to think. Please tell me the truth at last. What truth are you talking about? If you suspect me of anything, then say it to my face right away." Victoria defended herself as best she could, but her eyes betrayed the truth. Dennis had lived with her too long to recognize a lie. He nodded sadly and began to gather the papers back into his briefcase. "I won't give up fatherhood," he said. "Denise, please don't. We won't tell Melanie just yet. Let her think you and I are just separated. Think about the baby." We don't want to traumatize her psyche. She has too delicate a mental organization as it is. Exactly. And if she were my daughter, she'd have nerves as strong as mine. Dennis took the money from the nightstand, put a few things in his gym bag, and looked into the nursery. Daughter, I came by to say goodbye. Where are you going? Lights. The little girl ran up to him and hugged his leg. I'm going to have to live in another apartment. I want to live in another apartment too. Take me with you. And you'll stay here and live with your mom. He hooked it from his pant leg and stepped out into the hallway. Daddy, was all the girl could shout, and the door had already closed behind Dennis. Victoria ran up to Melanie and put her arms around her, soothing her with strokes on her head. Why did Daddy leave? He doesn't like living with us. Daddy's gone for a little while and he'll be back pretty soon. You'll paint a few more pictures and you won't even notice he'll be home by now. Wiping her tears with her sleeve, Victoria took her girl into her room and sat down on the floor with her. The girl began to draw a princess in a fairy tale forest. Mommy, here you go. So you two can draw whatever you dream of. She handed Victoria a blank sheet of paper and paints. Victoria waited anxiously and hoped that her husband's decision was not serious and he was about to come home. However, it didn't happen the next day, or a week, or a month later. For a long time, she cried at night, feeling completely powerless. The only person who supported her during this difficult time was her best friend Anna. It was to her that Victoria first called after the homeless situation. I have a really big problem, Victoria reported into the phone in a tearful voice. It sounds like something really serious has happened. Do you have time right now? I really need to talk to someone. I have a client coming in right now, but she's running a little late. So what's been going on with you? Dennis left me. You two had a fight? It's a very long story. Victoria breathed into the phone and realized she wasn't ready to share all the details with her friend just yet. It's no big deal. Don't worry. He'll come to his senses now and come back to apologize. I don't think that's the case. You always overdramatize everything. Remember when you were 18 and you fell in love with that guy from third year? I almost lost my mind there while I listened to all your tantrums. Found something to compare it to. Victoria immediately became embarrassed. It was an old story that had kept her on her toes, and it was from that moment on that they had become best friends. She liked a guy who was in his third year of medical school. Everyone around her already knew that she had fallen in love with him, and they were constantly making fun of her. Among the jokers were the guy's friends who advised her to be brave and ask him to go on a date. Victoria did so. However, no one bothered to inform her that the guy already had a girlfriend who was a freshman. Victoria felt betrayed. She had lost hope of her love and many close friends in one day. She was hurt by the fact that even her classmates knew about this girl, but still approved of her idea to ask him out. One day, Anna, who was in the same course as her friend's favorite boyfriend, told him everything she thought. She and Victoria then went out to drink beer and comfort the girl. Victoria assumed that this small incident would just pass and be forgotten. However, after it, she cried in the corridors of the institute for almost half a year. She had to face this guy and his girlfriend all the time. It was morally hard for her, and her classmates took it all as a very funny joke. Anna always helped her to defend herself from attacks, and they began to spend a lot of time together. At one point, Anna told her friend that the situation was partly her fault. She could have learned more about the guy before suggesting that she go on a date with him. Victoria was very angry with her then, but soon realized that she was right about something. And from that day on, they'd promised each other to share everything they were going through and to keep no secrets. It's different now, Victoria said. If only because we have a daughter in common. She's always asking me, when is Daddy coming back? And I have no idea what to tell her. Tell her that Daddy is an astronaut and went to Mars. Anna laughed. Very funny. What should I do? It all depends on what you and he fought about. But you don't want to tell me about it because it would sound terrible. And you've resented me for keeping a secret from you for years. That sounds like a serious threat to our friendship, Anna laughed. I promise not to take offense at you. Good. Dennis found out that Melanie wasn't his daughter. Anna practically screamed into the phone, shocked. What do you mean not his? Whose is it then? As far as I know, you haven't been seeing anyone else. I haven't for a long time. But there was a situation. What kind of situation? Was it that homeless guy? There's no other options. I was hoping to the last minute that Milani was Dennis's daughter, but he took a paternity test and brought it to me. It's just awful. I don't know what to tell you. Does he know who your daughter is really from? No, of course not. Have you thought about telling him about the situation? Maybe he'll realize it was an accident and won't be so angry. I'll never be able to tell him that a homeless man once slept in our bed in his place. That fact alone would make him not want to talk to me anymore, let alone more. I have a client coming in, Anna said. I can't talk anymore. Let's meet somewhere tonight and discuss it. I won't make it to tonight. Everything that's happened is going to make my head explode. There's nothing you can do right now, so pour yourself some wine, relax in the bathtub. I'll be at your place at Act 0. That's it. I can't talk. Milani and her mom liked to go out downtown on weekends. The little girl would beg for some candy and look at the passersby with great interest. So this Sunday they were walking along the Arbat, and the observant girl kept tugging at her mother's sleeve. Mom, look, what a strange ant went. Milani looked at the woman in the big red hat. Don't point your finger. It's not polite. But did you see it? Yes, I saw everything. And that auntie saw you pointing your finger at her too. It must have been unpleasant for her. But isn't that why she wore that big hat, to be noticed? Maybe. But that's none of your business. Go eat your ice cream and don't embarrass me. Suddenly Milani let go of her mom's hand and ran over to a poster hanging on the fence. It showed a picture from the category of modern art, which could not be understood by an ordinary person. Look how beautiful it is. The girl pointed her finger at the poster and shouted enthusiastically, not understanding what was beautiful about it. Victoria looked at the multicolored spots, which annoyed her more than caused admiration. What an interesting exhibition. Let's go quickly. I think it's going to rain soon. I'd love to go to it, Milani said sadly. The girl wasn't going to move away from the poster and didn't hear what her mother was saying to her. Victoria rolled her eyes. Such behavior of her daughter could mean only one thing. She should be taken to this exhibition right now, otherwise she would rave about it for a few days. Victoria read the poster carefully and used the navigator to find the address. Okay, let's go to this exhibition of yours, she said. Really? Yay! It's just around the corner in this building. They rounded the corner and went down into the basement. It was obvious to Victoria that a good artist wouldn't set up his exhibition in such a room, so she promised herself to spend no more than 10 minutes here and take her daughter home immediately. Milani, on the other hand, jumped with delight as soon as she saw some of the paintings at the entrance. It's beautiful. I wish I could paint like this, she shouted. Even now, you're much better than that artist. Look at this. But where is the art in it? I can explain it to you, said a man's voice behind them. Victoria turned around and saw a tall, bearded man. I don't think you can convince me that this is a masterpiece, she said. Well, I'll give it a try. How do you feel when you look at this painting? I feel like I'm wasting my time and would rather eat something right now. That's a very superficial judgment. What do you feel when you look deep inside yourself? The man kept up. I feel very tired, Victoria honestly admitted. But it's not because of the painting, it's because of the work. You see, art has made you think about your own life. That's how it should be. After all, art is the mirror of life. You say it so beautifully that I'm beginning to believe you, Victoria said. Lainey ran to another hall, and her mother followed her. There were sculptures on display, which to Victoria also seemed to be just pieces of clay, thrown as they were. The girl was impressed by absolutely everything. She greedily looked at each exhibit and sometimes sighed admiringly. Victoria just followed her from room to room and thought that in the worst-case scenario her daughter would do things like this in her adulthood. She was beginning to think that her husband was right to insist on teaching the girl math. What do you feel when you look at sculptures? The bearded man appeared behind Victoria's back again. I can't say for sure about the sculptures, but when I'm being stalked, I feel annoyed. I apologize, I didn't mean to bother you. That's all right, we'll be leaving soon. It would be a shame if you left early because of me. But understand, I can't leave this exhibition. The thing is, I am the author. You are. Victoria looked at the man curiously. Are you saying that you are an artist in a way? I don't write as well as I'd like to. But, as you can see, you've already exhibited in one of the best spaces in the city, in this basement. So you gave yourself away. Now it's clear to me that you don't know anything about contemporary art. This space was opened by Seleznev himself. Have you heard of him? No. Who is it? A girl. If you want, I can tell you a lot of interesting things about New York's contemporary artists and where the best paintings are exhibited. I can see that your daughter is very impressed with my exhibit. As narcissistic as it sounds, you have a child growing up with good taste. She likes everything, Victoria objected. She's still young. Melanie looked at her mother resentfully. You shouldn't say that about her. Talents, tastes come from childhood. They're either there or they're not. It's just like beauty. In your case, it's natural. But if you didn't have it, nothing could help you. Thank you for the compliment. You know what? I'm going to take you both out to dinner. Thank you. But we were just about to go home to eat there, Victoria said as politely as possible. After lunch, I could invite you to my apartment and show you my newest work. There's no need for that at all, Victoria said firmly. But Melanie started tugging at her skirt. Mom, I want to see more paintings. No, we're not going to Uncle's house. I'm not crazy enough to drive all the way across town to who knows where, to a man I'm seeing for the first time in my life. You don't have to go all the way across town. I live right next door in that 3-story building over there. You live in the center of New York, right in Manhattan. I didn't realize artists made so much money. You're right. A rich artist is a rare thing. But my work is highly prized by collectors of contemporary American art, so I can afford something. Let's go and see it. Her daughter insisted, looking at Victoria with big eyes. Okay, you both talked me into it, just for a little while. Don't worry, I have no intention of seeing you except to buy you coffee and show you the paintings. The man said he'd be leaving the exhibition for a while. He was recognized by several visitors when he went outside. They had to stay a little longer so that the artist could sign autographs and take pictures with his admirers. The man's home turned out to be very cozy. The view from the window was beautiful. On the walls hung his own paintings, and all the furniture was handmade. Victoria looked around with admiration. A large 2-bedroom apartment in the heart. Perhaps fate had thrown her the perfect man. He was well-mannered, knowledgeable, and good at art. And Melanie listened to his stories about painting with her mouth open. The man offered to give them a tour of his apartment. This is the picture I painted the first time I saw the ocean in winter. But it doesn't look like the ocean at all, Victoria shrugged. I didn't say it looked like the ocean. It's a picture of my emotions about the ocean. It's so hard to make sense of it all. You just have to stop thinking and start feeling. How does this color combination make you feel? I think these colors are very similar to each other. I mean, it's blue and blue in all their shades. Again, you misunderstand me. You don't think, you feel. I don't know what I feel. Understanding art requires a special perspective. And also, perhaps you have not had such strong experiences in your life that would make you sensitive to such subtle emotions. Victoria grinned and lowered her eyes. She'd had more than enough experiences in her life. The man noticed that he had raised an unpleasant topic for his guest and immediately switched to the next picture. Here it depicted joy. I never thought that joy is 3 colored spots. Victoria began to laugh. What do you think joy is? Joy is when everyone is healthy, when you get good news, when you get something you've been dreaming of for a long time. You guessed it. I painted this painting when I was able to do something I thought was impossible. I exhibited my work in Paris for the first time in my life and got rave reviews from critics. You have such an interesting life. The man led his guests into the kitchen and turned on the coffee machine. He looked at Victoria thoughtfully as she looked at the interior of his dining room. My life has only become so interesting in the last 3 years. What did you do before that? Nothing interesting. I was homeless and lived in a train station. That can't be. Victoria suddenly looked carefully into the man's face. Then she jumped up from her chair and took a step away from him. Yes, it can. I thought you'd recognize me at once, Ronald. Yes, it's me, the man said plaintively. But how did I go from being homeless to being the most sought-after artist? I had a lot of help from fate and you. If that day you had not helped me, did not let me wash and did not give me new things, hardly anyone would have taken me seriously with my paintings. But that's impossible. It doesn't happen that a homeless person suddenly turns out to be a brilliant artist. I've painted before, but no one was interested in the work of a man who lives in a train station and a mile away from it is nothing to breathe. Well, I have to admit, It's not a very pleasant encounter. I know what you mean. I don't think you can understand my situation. I still think about that night sometimes, and I can't believe how you treated me. I assure you that until you woke up and started to worry. I had no idea that I was doing anything that you wouldn't agree to. We had a lovely romantic evening. We laughed a lot. Then we put on some music and started dancing. Did you put something in my wine? You see, I don't want to hear your excuses. Just answer my question. Did it or did it not happen? Yes, it did. I put a powder in your wine, but it was completely harmless. It just helped you relax and be yourself. Person, you're so calm about it. Victoria grabbed her daughter's hand in anger and walked out. Please stay. I assure you that I am a decent person and I have never done anything like this again in my life. Thank you for the information. That one time was enough to ruin my whole life. Mom, are we leaving already? Malani asked. I want to stay a little longer to see the paintings. That's it. Uncle's out of paintings and you and I have to go. But Mom, I said we're leaving, Victoria replied. You have such a beautiful daughter, Ronald said. And she is so much interested in art. I wonder from whom she inherited this love. My husband. He's an art historian, Victoria lied. It doesn't look like anyone in your family knows anything about art. That's strange, but your daughter is just the right age. She must be about 5. I met you just about 6 years ago. Could she be? No, she can't. I'm married, and this is my husband's daughter. You keep your filthy innuendo to yourself. You should be grateful I didn't call the police that time. Victoria dragged Melanie by the arm, and she started crying and resisting because she wanted to sit with this interesting man some more. Victoria sat at work, but she couldn't concentrate on her business. She was distracted time and time again by various issues. All she had on her mind was yesterday's conversation with this artist. Was she angry with him? Did she want her daughter to have a real father? Could such a man even be trusted? There were far more questions in her mind than answers. When the secretary knocked on the door, Victoria even flinched in surprise. Victoria Vladimirovna, may I? Artur asked. Artur, you scared me so much. Victoria replied. Excuse me, you have a visitor. And Polson's right, Tixrusis. I have the nearest appointment an hour. Or did I get something mixed up in the schedule? He didn't make an appointment, but he really wants to talk to you. All right, send him in. Later, receptionist left and came back a minute later with a visitor. It turned out to be Denise. Victoria hadn't seen her ex-husband for several months and didn't even hope to meet him again. The girl wasn't sure if she was happy about such a surprise and pondered for the time being. Dennis walked up to her and handed her a huge bouquet of flowers. Arthur smiled and closed them in his office. Hi, and these flowers are for you, Dennis said. Thank you. What's the occasion of our anniversary today? If you remember, this is the day you and I went on our first date. I can't believe I forgot about that. I know even when we lived together, we didn't celebrate it every year, and now you probably have a lot of things to do. Dennis replies, I will have my nearest visitor only in an hour, so I have just the time right now. I just missed you and wanted to chat with you, that's all. Victoria looked at her ex-husband questioningly, and he looked embarrassed. I really miss socializing with you. I realized that I had lost the closest person to me. Dennis walked over to her and put his arm around her waist. Victoria felt his familiar hands, but immediately pulled away, not knowing how to react. What do you want from me? I don't know. I don't have time for this nonsense. If you want to get me back and live a normal family life, then you and I can discuss it. And if you're just here because you're bored or feeling guilty, I'm not interested in that kind of relationship. I just needed to sort myself out. Didn't you have enough time for that? Victoria asked. This breakup hurt me as much as it hurt you. Why do you think it's my fault? You're the one who cheated on me in the end. You didn't even let me explain myself. What's there to explain? You have a child with another man, and you lied to me all these years. Don't you want to know what I want to tell you now? I've closed this page, and I'm ready to take you along with this betrayal, Dennis said. He approached the girl again. But there was no cheating, and I don't want us to live together. If you don't trust me that much, it's ridiculous. Unnatural. Victoria laughed. At that moment, there was another knock at the door. The secretary poked his head in and announced, Victoria Vladimirovna, you have another visitor. He didn't sign in, but he refuses to leave. All right, let him in. I'll handle it, Victoria said in the tone of a real boss. Dennis, I have to work. I get it. I'm always very understanding when I get rejected. Good luck to you and your new family, Dennis said and started to leave. There is no new family. Why do you always suspect me of something? Victoria started to shout but stopped and forgot what she was going to say. Ronald was standing right in front of her. Hi. Is it okay if I don't have a record? He asked calmly. What are you doing here? How did you even find me? Victoria asked with fear in her voice. You used to pay for tickets at my exhibit. You dropped your center's business card. I get the feeling you're stalking me, Victoria said indignantly. I didn't mean to do anything wrong, but we need to talk. Ronald the artist kept up with her. Who is this man? Dennis intervened in the conversation. He is an old acquaintance of mine, the girl told him with irritation. He can wait outside the door while we talk here. And you and I have already talked, she said. I realize that you are not interested. No, Milan is very important to me, even though I know she's not my daughter, Dennis blurted out. Ronald spread his hands and looked at Victoria questioningly. That's it. So it turns out that it's not his daughter. Do I understand correctly that it's your ex-husband? Corrected the girl. Now everything fits perfectly since it is not his daughter and she is as talented as I am. I have no more doubts. Dennis suddenly took a step forward and pushed Ronald hard. Who the hell are you? What do you care about my wife and our child? The fact is, it's my daughter. Ronald said it as confidently as if he didn't realize he was in danger of a serious fight. I'm asking you to calm down. You're in my office. Victoria sat down in her supervisor's chair and covered her face with her hands. Denise, I understand that you feel guilty and want our relationship back. I've been thinking about it for a long time myself, but I've come to the conclusion that I don't want to. What do you mean you don't want it? Dennis, from surprise, even let go of his rival and also sat down on a chair. Imagine, I have the pride to keep you back. As for you, Ronald, your low behavior with me gives you no chance for forgiveness. I could never live with you and be your wife. I am very good to you, Ronald began, but Victoria gestured for him to shut up. Ronald, please let me speak. I've lived between two fires for too long and now I know what I want. Maybe a real father for your daughter. The artist asked with a sneer, realizing where Victoria was going with this. That would be wonderful. I would love for my daughter to meet her real father, but that's not going to happen. My daughter will always be sure that her father is Dennis and her talent is God-given. I don't want to ruin my child's life and make her worry. Well, in that case, which one of us are you going to choose? No one. The girl answered very calmly. Don't be ridiculous. You need a husband and your daughter a father. This is not the time to show your pride, said Dennis. But I mean it. Get out of here, both of you. She got up, went to the door and opened it. But I love you, Dennis said almost in a whisper. No, you don't love me. Are you bored, or did you suddenly remember how comfortable it was to live with me in my apartment? But even in our best years, I didn't feel loved. As both of you leave, I choose to be alone with my daughter. I will give her everything she needs on my... The men looked at each other. A secretary peeked into the office and reminded Victoria that she had a meeting in a few minutes. Victoria, the sponsors are here. Are you ready for them? Yes. Tell them they can come in. These two men are on their way out. Help them find their way out. Dennis and Ronald reluctantly left Victoria's office. She had several business meetings to attend today, and if successful, her business could expand significantly. It gave her confidence that she could handle all of life's difficulties on her own. How long can you sit on my neck? Husband freaked out. Why did she do it in the first place? I don't know. She wasn't old. She wasn't exactly a hag. Another thing is that he, her spoiled, crazy husband, needed a young one. The concept of young for Tom was clear. If a girl did not marry before 21 years old, then she is too old and something wrong with her. Don't ask me why 21st century medieval attitudes. It happens. And Kelly, 36, is a childless grandmother. It's like Tom's forgotten the time when he thought of his wife as his greatest treasure. Spoiled her, bought her everything she wanted, not even for her, but for him. Dragging her around the country from job to job. and then she became a suitcase without a handle. It happened without either of them noticing. She was 18 when they got married. He was 10 years older. She was pretty, in the style of actresses of the 50s, short stature, delicate face, big eyes. He's the most ordinary. You wouldn't immediately remember what he looked like unless they said his name. It seemed to Kelly that Tom had not just fallen in love with her, but clung to her like a tick. He couldn't let anyone else have her. After walking her home in the evening, he wouldn't dare leave the entrance for another hour or two until he saw the lights go out and the windows darken. Surely he was afraid that before Kelly went to bed, someone else might come in and take her away. There was no question about the seriousness of his intentions. He'd proposed to her within a week of meeting her. Tom cared less about the wedding itself, the restaurant, the guests, the honeymoon, can we do it with or without him. All he cared about was getting married and taking Kelly with him. In the meantime, Tom had quit his job again and was moving up north. Kelly's father kept silent, only sighed, resigned to his fate. And her mother cried she didn't want her only daughter to go so far away. Kelly herself had no time to think about it. Registry office on a weekday, without any celebration, some hastily organized home parties, and now the train, a rainy evening, and the carriage slowly begins to sail away from the platform. There in the new place, Tom rented a flat, waiting for the time when they would have their own. No carriages, dormitories, or the like that his new mates were content with. It wasn't so much that he was chasing comfort as he wanted to keep Kelly away from any encounters, even casual ones. She was to sit in that 9th floor flat like Rapunzel in the tower, seeing no one but her husband. When Tom was free, they'd go on nature trips. Kelly appreciated the beauty of the north, those pewter, brass, silver colors of the short summer, the still water mesmerizing. The rest of the time she was entertained by books. She'd signed up at the library. And serials, those endless ones where at the beginning of the series the characters start making themselves coffee and then finish the cup at the end. Serials that you could do all your housework to. Tom was a blob of energy, and that's what he took the others by. Charming seemed not at the expense of appearance or intelligence, but because of this vitality, which many lack. In certain cases, if there was no one brighter, he could become the soul of the company. He was always and everywhere regarded by his superiors as indispensable. He really was a jack of all trades. And when he got bored in one place and broke off to go to the other side of the country, it was always regretted by the bosses and those with whom Anatoly worked, and the women with whom he managed to get acquainted and who envied Kelly. "You're not a military man," Kelly said to her husband, "but I feel like an officer's wife always traveling over the road." Tom had always had money. He would never work for an idea. And now, to comfort and cheer up his wife, he floods her with presents. In the wardrobe, racks of dresses, blouses, and suits hung as tightly as if they were in a shop. Kelly could match the outfits with shoes of the right color. And the saying, "a well-to-do woman is one who doesn't wear ripped tights under her trousers," certainly applied to Kelly. He wouldn't let her work. It was out of the question. "We've got enough money," Tom said. "Nothing to go where you can find adventures on your tail." And he didn't want kids for a long time, maybe 10 years. Whether it was the settled, beautiful home life with quiet evenings, cleanliness and freedom to dispose of his time that was more precious to him, or whether he was subconsciously afraid that he would be jealous of Kelly, even of a child. When they finally settled down in a large regional city, their own flat was bought. Tom became a small boss. It turned out that Kelly could not get pregnant and give birth in any way. But this was not the main reason why her husband's attitude to her changed. She simply remained as she was, pretty, but no longer young. But young, quiet, not entering into arguments, and so predictable. He'd had enough of the bland. What did he want? The first time he said it was an accident. It wasn't worth mentioning. He forgot it immediately. "You're sitting on my neck." Kelly threw her head back. That phrase clawed at her heart. Those words, casually dropped, are always the most sincere. Tom didn't pursue the subject. He was still putting together the wardrobe she'd bought, but his face was absent. In his thoughts, he lived somewhere else. It wasn't long before she realized he had another. He had a crush on a girl the same age Kelly had been when they met. The age difference seemed so vast to Kelly that a connection couldn't be in her mind. It would look both ridiculous and laughable. Naive Daisy. Tom's passion was named Jane, and she was the complete opposite of his wife. An athletic girl with long, strong runner's legs and hair dyed bright pink. And she had so many things, like intricate patterns on her long, sharp toenails, piercings in every possible place, intricate tattoos, that Jane could be looked at for a long time, like a painting or a puzzle. However, Jane didn't make men puzzle for long. She gave up quickly, if the price was right. All this Kelly had learnt in roundabout ways. The big city wasn't really that big. There was only one thing that bothered Tom, but it was the most important thing for her. Jane was not averse to making money wherever she had a chance. The concept of fidelity did not fit in the head of the pink Malvina. She was flying. You want to let her go and keep her at the same time. To let her go, so as not to suffer and not to be tormented by jealousy, to keep her, because without her, no way. Without Malvina, life seemed long, empty and boring, like a gray canvas that stretches to the horizon. His wife became annoying, because she was that very cloth smooth, predictable, without a single bump. You could walk on it with your eyes closed and never stumble. Tom was tired even of Kelly's cuteness, which was beginning to show. If there was a reason to fight, a thunderstorm broke out. A consonant word for a tiff, they'd break everything that could be broken, from dishes to relationships. Maybe he'd feel better. But Kelly didn't go for the provocation. She stood over the cooker, slow-cooking borscht sacred. The smell of meat, garlic, parsley, and satiety. If satiety can have an odor. Even if you swear you eat such borscht and you feel happy. Tom overcame himself and decided to hurry things up. He had a wide circle of acquaintances, including a pimp. No, not the film boy who arrives in a nice car to herd girls on the red light street. Michael was a subtle personality. Either a pimp or a procurer. He could order a girl, a boy, a waistcoat to cry into all night. Michael was also a pro. He could unmistakably determine who was worth what, and who to offer whom. Sometimes he did things that were completely unexpected, but he was never wrong. He knew that this young blonde, with the appearance of a model, can get sick of his partner in an evening. But that woman over there, which seems to be nothing special, will be carried in his arms for a long time. Tom saw Michael several times a year in companies of a certain kind, and always by chance. The next meeting was just as casual, but suddenly Tom had a thought that struck him as brilliant. Maybe he'd just had too much to drink. "Listen, can't you put my wife on the case?" he said. Michael had seen a lot of things in his life, perhaps too much, but here he was dumbfounded. Yes, among his clientele were married women who sometimes wanted a thrill and who would not mind going left. Almost all of them wanted their cheating to remain a secret, except for one totally promiscuous couple who were looking for another equally promiscuous couple. Michael tried to advise the casual acquaintance to go wake up, but the same life experience told him that it would be a good idea to look at this spouse with his own eyes. You never know. They made an appointment. Tom didn't tell Kelly who Michael was. Maybe she wouldn't be right for him, and then they'd have to say goodbye to the tempting idea. He couldn't just leave Kelly at the railway station on a corner somewhere to find her own clients. It would be easier to just kick her out. Divorce her. Michael came to visit, as if he were just an acquaintance. Kelly served the men coffee. She baked a pie with apples and set the table, moving, as always, silently and without uttering unnecessary words. She tried not to interfere with the conversation, present but not involved and not noticing that Michael was watching her. Tom also cast glances at his wife, but not satisfied. Kelly had not dressed up as he had asked. She remained in a simple homemade dress, blue with a ruffle, her hair gathered in a ponytail. She was an actress. Now she was a Ryazan woman. Who needs such a woman? Every man's got one of those. Michael didn't stay long. Tom went out to escort him up the stairs. He was sure that Michael would reject the goods, but he said vaguely, "We'll see." And that was the end of it. 3 weeks later, he called out of the blue and asked Tom for Kelly's phone number. "What do you want?" Tom became wary. Michael was silent for a few moments. "I don't understand what this shifty man wants in the end. To compete with him, to sell his wife himself. Flag in hand and a steamroller to go with it." But Michael indeed had an extraordinary case. So he clarified. "I think your Kelly would be good for one person, for a conversation." "What do you mean, a conversation?" "He has circumstances. I won't go into details, none of your business, sorry, but this man will be at the restaurant late tonight. He'll be drinking a lot, and he'll probably want someone to be there for him. You listen to what he says, or just keep silent with him. I answer with my head, no one will hurt your wife." "Huh?" Tom's got it. "Then Kelly's fine. You know, when it comes to keeping quiet, she's the best. So give me her phone number, dummy. Because you and I are getting a film, the groom agrees. The relatives agree. and the bride has to be persuaded. In relations with women, if it was necessary, Michael knew how not to press, but to achieve his goal by persuasion found the way to the heart. Tom hesitated a moment, and the phone dictated. Later, he would discuss these piquant details with Malvina, and she would complain that there would be no one to take pictures of the secret meeting. If there was dirt on anyone, she would be even more submissive. When he got the number he was looking for, the pimp called immediately. "Kelly," he said. "Do you remember me?" "It's Michael. I was visiting you. I have a huge favor to ask of you. Don't take it for granted." The woman didn't answer, but Michael realized she wasn't speaking because she was confused. "Come to this restaurant tonight. I'll introduce you to a man who cannot be left alone. Believe me, it's very important. You'll save your soul." "You should see a psychiatrist," Kelly said and hung up. Then she went about her usual business, and somewhere in the back of her mind, like a spring that had suddenly broken through, she was filled with the thought that it was not for nothing, that it was Tom who had thought up and organized everything. Both Michael and the meeting to which she had now been called. It made her want to cry. Kelly suddenly realized that she hadn't cried for a long, long time. Maybe she hadn't even learned how. You could shed tears if you felt sorry for yourself, but she was too tired to comfort herself. Tom didn't want to look ahead to see a routine life, an impending old age. Kelly was afraid to look back. She could see herself standing there in that kerchief, with the dust rag. The years were behind her when she'd gone from princess to Cinderella, and the prince had degenerated and wouldn't divorce her. Kelly felt like getting drunk. She called Michael back. "Okay, I'll go," she said. It was a hotel restaurant, fancy and so expensive that Kelly was embarrassed to even walk past it. The carpeting there was already outside, and there were vases of orchids at the entrance. Kelly hadn't bought clothes in a long time. She'd stayed in that other life, with her husband blowing dust off her, and now Kelly didn't know what to wear. If all she had to do was talk, this dark blue jacket would do. She could match it with the pale blue silk dress she had once loved so much. The silk was real, delicate, not weighty, but there was hardly any cosmetics at home, and perfume only Grasshopper Bridge, with its heavy, clingy odor. Kelly was ready for Michael to send her back, to call some young girl for his client. She was even more embarrassed that she had come first. She walked around the entrance for a while, hesitant to stop lest she be chased away. There must be someone like a doorman. He'd be out in a minute. "Why are you standing here? You can't linger here." A black car pulled up. Very inconspicuous, Michael the pimp didn't like too much attention. He got out with the businesslike look of a man who comes to this hotel almost every day. He recognized Kelly immediately. He nodded, didn't say anything about her appearance, but as if he was grateful that she had agreed to this venture at all, and was standing here in person, not late. He took her politely under the elbow, and they went inside. The restaurant was in a semi-basement. Kelly was far from all that. She was much more comfortable with unsophisticated dumplings and pie shops. She would have felt out of place, even if she'd just come here with friends. Now she was tense, looking around, even though she didn't know who was waiting for her. Michael knew. The dim lights, the heavy wooden tables, the bar. For some reason it all reminded Kelly of an old sailing ship, a caravel being carried along by the waves of life. Michael took Kelly to the corner farthest from the entrance, the one with the least light. Here sat the man they needed, or who needed them. A dark-haired, middle-aged man with a thin, nervous face. Kelly noticed there was a hat lying next to him. Who wore hats nowadays? The glass of wine was almost finished. Miss Kelly introduced Michael's companion, and Kelly threw him a surprised look. How did he know her middle name? "She'll sit with you as long as you want." Michael understood, but he didn't answer her question. "He'll give the name himself if he wants to. Well, I'll leave you to it." The man nodded carelessly. He was immersed in his own thoughts. Another similar nod to Kelly for her to sit down. She sat down with a straight back. There were hardly any customers in the restaurant. Only at one other table, a group of men engrossed in conversation. A young bartender behind the counter, in a white shirt and black waistcoat, and a waitress who approached them almost immediately. A dyed blonde in her mid-40s. She had a tired look. "Order whatever you want," the man said to Kelly, nodding at the menu. What food could she think of right now? She was feverish with excitement. A glance at her was enough to realize that. Bring us some for now." Kelly didn't know what the mysterious-sounding words meant, but she guessed they meant wine or something stronger, and an appetizer of some kind. There was silence in the air as they waited for the waitress. "What should I call you anyway?" Kelly asked. And after a while, "Are you sick?" He was definitely awake. There was confusion in his voice. "What makes you think that?" She shrugged her shoulders. "Nothing else occurred to me. Only that you have learnt that you are ill with some terrible, hopeless disease and have no one to talk to. And I'm now a traveling companion who won't see you tomorrow, so it's okay. You will indeed, one of these days, hear of my death," he said tiredly and calmly, as if it were a done deal. "But it is of no consequence." He took her hand, but there was nothing sensual in the movement, nothing of the kind. He held her wrist. "Here you are, you need to check your heart. Remind me when you leave. I'll text you the number and you call." "You're a doctor." She suddenly remembered him. Yes, he was a doctor, a very famous one. The kind of doctor they always say was from God, from God. She remembered his name, James, but his middle name was lost somewhere. Then I realized. "What do you want to put your hands on yourself?" "Others will do it for me." "But how? Are you being threatened?" She didn't understand. Maybe some crazy patients he didn't cure. "You can't save everyone. But if you know, why don't you leave? Why don't you run away from them? They'll get you everywhere. There's nothing you can do about it. But I can still live today." There was a momentary flash of rage in his voice. "Exactly." He tried to argue with fate for a moment. The waitress brought the wine. James signaled for her to leave. She came back with another tray, set out the plates of appetizers, and finally left them alone. "What do they want with you?" Kelly asked. "What for anyway?" He was silent for a moment, then said, as if he hadn't heard her, as if he were talking to himself, "I've had quite a lot of time, after all. Life could have been shorter and much more precious, so there's not much to repent or regret. But behind it all was a little boy who was desperately scared. And Kelly realized that. She touched his hand too, but not in the way he had done before. She just covered his hand with hers, letting him know that she felt his fear, and she felt sorry for him. "Do you have anyone?" Kelly asked, and anticipating that he wouldn't understand her question or would misunderstand it, she clarified, "My mom, my sister, someone in the family. Can't you go to them?" He shook his head. "I have relatives, but they are far away in Siberia. We haven't been in touch for a long time. It's just that life has separated us. But I wouldn't go to them anyway. You can't set them up." She took a few sips of this insanely expensive wine, which didn't seem to taste like anything special, but it made her head swim gently. And despite the oddly tragic note of the conversation, a sense of flight and recklessness came. "It's a good thing you have someone at all," she said. "I miss it all so much now, my childhood, my grandmother, whom I would hug now, her old house. It's a former merchant's house. It had such thick walls, such wide windowsills, and many, many geraniums. I even remember the feeling of it sitting on the windowsill, knees tucked up, a ray of sunlight falling on your face so that you squeeze your eyes shut, and the smell of geraniums. Everything was so safe and solid then, and it seemed like it would always be that way." Kelly noticed that the memories of his childhood seemed to bring him out of his stupor from the world where he was now. James was distracted, herself, in her most difficult, infinitely difficult moments. It had been a lifesaver. Thinking back to the distant years was like diving to great depths. Everything appears a little unreal, a little blurred. It makes my ears pop, but the rest of what I want to think about ceases to exist. So they sat there, reminiscing about their childhood, each of them his own. It didn't matter how interesting and coherent the story turned out to be. What mattered was that you wrap yourself in that memory like a warm blanket. James was talking about a stream that ran through the park in their town, which went into a mysterious black pipe to make films, that's all, and then flowed into a pond, where in summer the boys caught small fish, the size of a little finger, and in winter they skated. And you could clear the snow with a mitten, look through the ice, as if into an aquarium at the algae, at the green beads of cassava, at the still frog, which also looked at you eye to eye. "Come on, I'll walk you back to your room," Kelly said at last. The hour was such that it was time for the restaurant to close as well. She could sense from herself that it would be hard for her to stand on her feet. And how would he feel? He'd started drinking before she got there. But if they leaned on each other, they'd make it. He remembered his number was 211. But when they stopped in front of the door, he gave the key to Kelly, not sure he could get into the keyhole. There were mirrors and orchids in here too. Orchid pots were everywhere in this hotel, and there was glass and metal all around, also shiny, cold, reflecting you 1,333 times. James put his arm around Kelly and stood, swaying slightly. She was precisely the one person he was related to that was so hard for him to tear himself away from. An inexplicable feeling came over her as she pressed herself against his chest. They just stood there, neither moving. And still, just yesterday, Kelly wouldn't have imagined for herself that such a thing was possible. She was reminded of the boy Ben she'd known since she was a little girl. He lived in their backyard. Only she'd been very young then, about 4 or 5 years old, and he was already graduating from high school. A handsome red-haired boy, her first love, which she hid from everyone, even from her mom. Then they saw each other many years later. He became a helicopter pilot, went to Afghanistan, fought in battles, got married. His Mia was a very sick person, a severe diabetic, and everything was repeatedly complicated by her carelessness. She could forget to give an injection on time, and he trembled when he rushed home after work. What would he catch? Would everything be safe there? He didn't look like his old self anymore, heavy, gray-haired. But Kelly had a wonderful feeling every time she found herself in his company. The cliched expression, like being behind a stone wall, was the most accurate. Protection, calmness, confidence in her own safety, and the fact that he would not let anything bad happen would shield her from everything. Of course, they remembered each other, talked about their childhood. And Kelly admitted to no one that she often envied Mia's diabetes. And now James was the second one to come her way. It couldn't be explained in words. He was in some desperate bind from which he saw no hope of getting out, and she was beside him, feeling the peace she'd only had as a child, and she couldn't find the strength to pull away, to say goodbye, to walk away. It was the one moment of her life that if you didn't appreciate, if you didn't give up everything else for it, you'd always regret missing. Kelly closed her eyes and took a short, convulsive breath. In the morning, she started to hurriedly pack, but he told her, "Kelly, sit down." His tone was different now, as if the momentary weakness he had allowed himself yesterday had passed. Now he spoke to her as an elder, as one to be obeyed. "What I'm going to tell you now, you must listen calmly." Kelly sat down. She didn't look at James, averting her eyes. This night felt like it had been stolen from her. She didn't feel worthy of this man. What had Tom insinuated to her over the past few years aged, faded, bland, unwanted? There's no such thing as an unattractive woman. There's no such thing as too little vodka. Well, last night's wine had been enough to make her pass for a sensual beauty. But it's daytime, sunshine in her wrinkled, unmade face. "I'll give you some money," James said. And before she could take offense and resent that it was payment for the night, he continued. "You're going to have to change your life very soon. You're going to have to do it. Believe me, I know. If I turn out to be wrong, you can toss that money in the Mississippi, give it to charity. But I'm giving it to you now so that when the time comes, you can walk away and start over. Do you understand me?" She didn't realize how much money he was talking about until he opened her purse and dropped in 3 wads of $5,000 banknotes in a banker's girdle. Kelly gasped, "Are you crazy? I'm not taking it for anything." "Luba, I don't need that money anymore," he said, separating each word from the other. "That's what I wanted somewhere in some fund. You can do it for me later." But she was so shocked by what was happening that she let the words pass her ears. "Will you give me your phone number?" she asked as she walked away, resigned to the weight of her purse. "Sure," he dictated the number. "Have you calmed down?" His face didn't flinch. "Yes." "Will I see you again?" He pulled her to him again and stroked her hair for a long time. And now she was sure that even if they never met again, this bond would remain between them forever. The house was empty, Tom at work, the usual mess that reigned whenever her husband stayed home for even a few hours without her, the dirty dishes in the kitchen. Kelly walked slowly through her flat, as if it were someone else's. Would Tom ask her when he returned if she'd had anything with this stranger from the hotel, or just a conversation, as the pimp had promised? and probably her husband had arranged with the lawyer for some sum of money to be received for her. In the evening, Tom asked no questions. He took the lid off the pot and inhaled the smell of chicken soup with a look of bliss on his face. Pouring himself a deep bowl, still steaming, he sat down and began to eat. Kelly walked out of the kitchen. Another day passed, another. James didn't call her, nor did she call him. But Kelly had no doubt he would make himself known. People like that don't lie, don't dodge, don't disappear, don't sneak out of other people's lives in haste like thieves. On Saturday, before having coffee, Tom went down to the ground floor and picked up the mail. Yes, they still subscribed to a few newspapers, and, for Kelly, an indoor plant magazine in Archaism, but there it was. Kelly herself didn't know why she picked up the local paper, unfolded it, and saw his portrait. A famous doctor. Tragic death. Burnt body found in the woods. All his regalia was listed: born, graduated from the institute, worked, taught. The funeral will be today. They say fainting can be avoided. Kelly remembered something like that. It is only in films and books heroines beautifully and smoothly sink to the floor, and the heroes rush to bring their feelings. Kelly's friend had fainted once. In a very unfortunate way, she had fallen and knocked out her front teeth. Kelly herself was now dizzy, and a black veil was thickening in front of her eyes. She fumbled for a trestle, sat down, and just breathed deeply for a while, concentrating on that. When she felt better and realized she could stand up, Kelly said to her husband, "I need to go to the funeral." She couldn't see his face, but she could clearly picture the way he raised his eyebrows. "Whose are these? Do you know him?" She couldn't remember if she had a black dress. What did it matter, though? James was being buried from that farewell hall in the medical center. Kelly had never seen so many people come before, and she never would again. The small hall couldn't hold everyone, and people were standing outside. Someone tried to go inside, but a young woman wearing a mourning bandage on her head came out. She was tall, not grief in her eyes, but defiance, a desire to stand up for herself. "Wait here. There's no room for relatives there, it's stuffy. What do you care? The coffin is closed anyway." Someone whispered that it was Alicia, the seventh water on the Sour Patch, the sister-in-law of a cousin, and sighed disapprovingly. Why hurt people? It's a common grief, and indeed crying without hiding. Very young girls crying old people. These were James's former patients. Those whom he saved, pulled out, came out. A unique, absolutely unique doctor. There would be no more like him. He could see right through a person, look at them, touch them, and realize what had happened to you. And they'll never find the people who killed him. That's how it always happens. If such a unique person is taken away from us, no one will be responsible. When the crowd began to move, and they carried wreaths and heavy lacquered coffin, when they started to get into buses, there were not enough standing places. And there was a cavalcade of cars and young guys on motorbikes, bikers. They were patients, too. Kelly didn't even try to join anyone, to ask to get into a car, to squeeze onto a bus, to stand on the steps. She leaned against a birch tree and cried, covering her face with her hands. She cried even after everyone had left. It was somehow unnoticeable. Kelly spoke to Tom now as if he were a stranger. Everyone lived their own lives, and in the evenings Kelly sat in the rocking chair by the window for a long time. She had her knitting on her lap, but she did not touch the needles and was deep in thought. About 3 weeks later, Tom said to her, "I found you another client." Kelly didn't immediately realize what he was saying. She looked at her husband exactly as he said the phrase in a language she didn't know. "Well, they gave me such good money for you that time," he explained. "Now Michael is offering more." Yeah, Kelly said automatically. James knew everything in advance. "You'll see I'm right." Kelly found nothing better than to hide the money he gave her inside the piano. There they waited for their time, and it had come. Now it had to be decided where to go. Pack her things and disappear from the house right after her husband left for work, so he'd keep her out of her hair longer. No, of course she'd leave him a note, explain that he didn't need to look for her. Maybe he'd even be glad, and a pink Malvina would take up residence in their flat tomorrow. Kelly didn't care about that. She knew she wouldn't go to her parents' house, because there, if her husband wanted to look for her, he'd find her immediately. And she needed to get away from everyone and start, as James had told her to do, with a clean slate. She was sure he could see everything that was going on from there, knew she was pregnant too. It was a gamble, of course, and with the money that had fallen on her from the sky, or rather had been shoved into her bag, Kelly had bought a modest house in the countryside rather than a luxurious city flat, which would have sufficed for her. She put the rest of the money into an account. She wanted silence, the silence from Voznesensky's poems. I want silence, silence. Are my nerves burned? Silence. So that the shadow of the pine tree, tickling us, shifting, chilling us like a prank, along our backs to the little toes of our feet, of silence. The man who had sold her house was overjoyed. Some years ago, he had built this little house for his old mother to replace the wooden hut that had promised her. One room, a kitchen and facilities in a small cubbyhole at the end of the corridor. What else do you need to live? But the mother had already turned 95, and even in this house box she could no longer live alone. Her son took her to his house. The house, painted for some reason in the color of sea waves, remained an orphan, for country roads for country dwellers cramped, but Kelly just right. She arrived with only one bag, and at first she was afraid if someone came to the wicket, looking out from behind the curtain, trying to see who needed it. But Tom didn't look for her. He rang once. Kelly's heart snapped when she saw who the call was from, but all he asked was, "You're not coming back?" "No." "Are you paunchy or something?" He guessed. "Not your concern. And the baby's not yours." "Indeed, it's not mine, at least begging with this child, if you're so stupid." "What's it to me?" "That's what I called to say I've changed the locks in the flat, so I can't come and take out whatever you want. And Jane's home most of the day." Anyone else would have wished Jane would choke on other people's stuff. But Kelly was too quiet. All she said was, "We've been together so many years, and you don't know me that well." She was settling into the village. Any walk turned into a long journey. You have to go to the shop, put an hour on it. To the pharmacy, to the post office that's even further. Only the church was close. Almost across the road you could see the domes through the window. The church, by some whim of fate, was the same color as her hut. But it was not a second home for Kelly. The priest was too peculiar. Father Valentine had nothing in common with that legendary Valentine of love. Soon Kelly began to suspect that the priest had been exiled to such a remote village for his brashness. He considered himself to be the first authority for everyone. He criticized even his own superiors, going as far as the patriarch and parishioners, at whom he was angry. Could get a nettle on the forehead from the expansive priest. The women who worked in the temple hoped that it was a youthful thing, that it would all pass. The only sin that the priest could admit to with a stiffened heart was that he was a complete stranger to Nestiazatism. His house was the best in the village, and there was room for another church. Still, Kelly came to the services at least once in a while, stood at the door, and as soon as she felt stuffy, hurried out into the fresh air. Luckily for her, the family had a hospital, not a hospital, but a small, cool, almost empty old hospital, where Kelly was monitored so that she didn't have to travel far in a crowded bus to the district center. Gradually, Kelly was drawn into her new existence. She planted her own herbs in the vegetable garden, remembered the names of the local shop assistants. She was already left her favorite buns in Rozhenka when the goods were finished. People on the street greeted her. And yet she was afraid of the nights. In the city, the night is conventional, except that at 2 or 3 o'clock the streets quiet down for a while. The village, on the other hand, was sinking into darkness like the sea. Rare lanterns and lights not in all the houses. The darkness seemed to swamp everything around it. The glowing windows somewhere made one think of a ship standing in the distance, on the roadstead. Anything could happen at night. Kelly was afraid that her labor would start at night, too, and the ambulance wouldn't arrive in time. So she agreed to go to the hospital a few days before her due date, and was glad she hadn't had time to get a cat like she wanted. Who would she leave her with now? There was nothing left for her but to rely entirely on fate. Would she live? Would the baby be all right? Would she have the strength to look after it? All this now depended not on her, but on some higher power. But everything had gone remarkably well. She even managed somehow to brace herself internally, and not to scream. And the boy that Anne the midwife had shown her had been very good too, though his face was red and puffy. "But look at his eyes, they're silver," said Anne. "I've never seen anything like them, really." Kelly knew she wouldn't name the baby James. She was superstitious now, catching the signs of fate. The son was not to repeat his father's fate. And a week later, when she returned home, Staggering from weakness, she knew what name she would give her son Mark. They had never had such a name in their family before. Let everything begin with a clean slate. Father Valentine insisted that all newborns be baptized in the church. God forbid, not at home, even in the bitter cold. Boys are brought into the altar, he said. How can you deprive a child of that? It was August. It smelled of apples, and at night the stars flew to earth as often as snow in winter. Mark's godparents were neighbors, husband and wife, Chloe and Ethan. When the boy was brought to the temple, he laughed for the first time. He was lying in Ethan's arms and pulling his hands upwards to where the blue haze of the dome was, and he laughed as if he saw someone he knew and was happy about it. He sees angels, said the woman who cleaned the temple. There was sadness in her voice. Seeing angels is also a challenge because cleanliness has to be matched. What Mark was seeing, naturally, no one knew about until the boy spoke. No one even understood what was going on. Well, the child laughs and stretches his arms as if someone is standing in front of him, but probably many babies do that. And sometimes, especially at night, when Kelly put him to bed, Mark would cry and wrap himself in the blanket, as if he hoped to escape under it. What are you afraid of? Luba coaxed him affectionately. There's no one in the room, only you and me and the cat sitting over there, washing itself. The cat that they had been given as a present and crossed themselves over. Probably the neighbors didn't know where to give the litter. It was the most ordinary, gray-colored, nasal, big-eyed. Later it seemed to Luba that she had special feelings for the boy. There was a cupboard in the room, left by the previous owner. They had been like this in almost every house before, tall, wooden, with hangers on the right, shelves on the left, and a square of glass in the door, covered with embroidery. On a black background, an old woman had painted roses with a needle and thread. Mark was afraid of the wardrobe at night. During the day he could climb into it and play there, God knows what he imagined, among the hangers of dresses. He could have a house or a spaceship in there, but when it started to get dark, the first place where that darkness descended was the wardrobe ajar. Mark didn't even dare look in there. And if his gaze did fall there by chance, he withdrew it immediately, as if something terrible lurked there and watched him from there, something better not to be seen face to face. Then the cat would leap to Mark and stare into the darkness herself, staring with cold yellow eyes, as if she were on guard and watching. She knew unmistakably when the boy was worried, when he was having nightmares, and she would slip in and lay on his chest, becoming a shield between him and those he feared. Distracted by her song, she purred surprisingly loudly. As Mark began to talk, Kelly asked him, "Honey, what do you see?" "There." He answered expressively, nodding at the cupboard and raising his eyebrows, not understanding how the obvious could not be clear to her, and almost adding, "There it is." Sometimes, to his mother's utter consternation, Mark began to mutter excitedly and quickly, talking either to himself or to someone whom today's psychologists like to call an imaginary friend. In everything else, the boy not only did not differ from his peers for the worse, he outperformed them. About 3 years old, learned to read, and by the time he went to school, read many books from the Library of Adventures. He knew a lot of poetry, wrote in jagged block letters, and had the kind of imagination that made the fairy tales so beloved by children pale in comparison. On a warm April evening, Kelly sat with Mark by the river. Even though she was settling in a new place, but still she could call only her son her soulmate. And when she had the chance, she took him by the hand, and they went for a walk somewhere far away, then along the path among the meadows that bloomed so gloriously in summer. Then between the mysterious ferns, the forest was in darkness, and the ferns seemed to glow by themselves with a soft green light to a distant lake or following the bends of the river, where the local boys did not climb. They sat on the cliff, looking at the swift current, at the sand. It was amazing here, almost completely white, silky, and suddenly Mark touched his mother's elbow. "Look, Mum, there's a leshy," he said. Kelly took a look. It was just a huge, human-sized stump with petrified, intertwined roots. Look at it. It's the woodsman leaning over the river. He is old. He came out of the forest after winter and came to say hello to the mermaid. She is looking at him from the pool, and he extends his hand to her, saying, "Well, have you survived the cold?" Kelly realized it was all imagination. "You'll probably write your own book someday." She kept wanting to hug her son, to hold him. And every time she held back from doing it, she couldn't. She couldn't let Mark become too tender, too vulnerable. He had to live in a cruel world. She knew that well. "No, Mom, and I'd love not to see it, but it's there, you know. We went to the cemetery yesterday," he said, even with irritation. They did go there yesterday, along with an old lady neighbor who had asked him to help clean up a grave. It was already difficult for her to bend over, but she wanted to visit her husband. The old lady walked with her right hand resting on a stick, with Kelly supporting her on her left. "So?" Her mother didn't understand. Mark sighed. "There was also a funeral going on at that time, remember? Well, this auntie, she stood back and watched." "What lady?" Kelly asked. Mark patiently explained. "The one they thought was buried. She stood to the side and watched them. Only she was a little different, not like them, as if she were made of thick fog, a little transparent, wearing a white polka dot blouse, a pleated skirt, and a scarf." Kelly inwardly gasped. She knew who Mark was talking about because she had gone to say goodbye to the deceased. She was already part of that circle when everyone from the neighborhood saw the deceased off, when neighbors came to celebrate a wedding or a birth. But she hadn't taken Mark with her to the house yesterday, and the only thing he could see in the cemetery was a staked coffin. Kelly squatted down in front of her son and took him by the shoulders. "I'm begging you," she said. "No, I beg you. Tell me everything you see that others don't see, only me. Only me. Do you understand?" He looked at her earnestly with his silver eyes, which the further they went, the more they took on a marvelous hue. She was not a hypnotist. She could not suggest anything to him, but he could sense from her tone that the matter was serious. "Do you understand?" She tried to explain to him as an adult. "If you like this, left and right will start to tell everyone about the foresters and ghosts. At first people will think that you're making up everything, that you just think it, and when you grow up a little, you'll be locked up in a madhouse." "Where to?" "Ben." He had this habit of raising his eyebrows. "It's a place where they lock you in a room and don't let you see your mum. There are bars on the windows. You sit on a chain like a dog and they feed you from a dog bowl." In her heart, Kelly asked the higher powers to forgive her for this cruelty, because the worst thing for her was that if Mark was declared insane, they might not put him in an asylum, but they wouldn't be able to avoid notoriety. And if it stuck, alas, forever. Mark nodded. "But if something scares you, if there's something you want to share, we'll talk to you about it," Kelly insinuated, squeezing his hand painfully. "But only to me, only to me, only to me about it. Deal?" Mark kept his word. What he'd really been through, even Kelly didn't know. You can't describe every shadow, every look or call from the beyond. Mark had learned to hold back. The only time he'd nearly blundered was when, in 10th grade, the boys had decided to celebrate Halloween. By this time, his classmates already knew that Mark was the best artist in the school, and he was asked to make up those who came in costumes. One of the worst bullies, Alex Smith, dressed up as a devil, and when he sat down on a chair in front of Mark, he looked up and shuddered. Then he picked up a box of paints, but every time he swung the brush, Mark looked away, as if he were drawing a picture from the original. The makeup was amazing. Alex was scared of himself in the mirror. "How did you come up with that?" he asked, looking at the creepy image he had created. There he stands. Mark started and stopped, and that autumn he was being drafted into the army. Kelly desperately didn't want to let her son go, but she just didn't know how to avoid it. He'd grown up to be a healthy, good-looking lad, the kind of guy who wouldn't be rejected by the medical board. Unless he had to pay someone a bribe, there was money. But how to do it all? Kelly agonized. She was embarrassed, ashamed, but she felt more sorry for Mark. "No need, Mom. I'll go and come back," said the son. "That's what I'm telling you. Let's go into town while we still have time. You can show me your father's grave." Kelly didn't know where James was buried, but it wasn't hard to find him. Every cemetery has its Rublevka, and this was one, laid out in the bad 90s. It was first inhabited by higher-class gangsters, victims of contract killings and random shootings. Then, they were joined by businessmen from the same gangster circles of higher class, but they stayed here longer. Servants of the people and the heads of the last surviving factories were added here. The monuments were rich black or colored granite 1.5, 2 human heights. Gloomy spruce trees, heavy chains fencing off the slabs of the grounds. The burials were with reserve, with the expectation for the whole family in the future. But sometimes there were decent men here. James had a simple white marble monument. On his gravestone were surgical gloves and a scalpel, as if he'd just come back from an operation and dropped them without looking. Kelly was grateful to fate that the grave had been found, and so quickly that she could show it to her son. She shifted her gaze from the monument to her son, who was taller than she was. Mark stood and stared, his face growing more and more perplexed. And then he said, "There's no one here." "What do you mean?" "The coffin is empty." Kelly searched for an explanation. She already knew her son wasn't wrong, but there was no way he could be right. But it's been so long, and there was a big fire. It must have been like a crematorium. Mark only shook his head, but he looked at his mother again and said nothing. They walked towards the exit along the cemetery alley, and golden maple leaves swirled above them. Mark served really well. He wrote letters to his mother, which not only had no complaints, but always a joke, always a light mockery, and Kelly smiled as she read them. But he didn't go back. He found a job in town. And what a job. Kelly fought with her son for almost the first time. "Your father's going to curse me from the dead," she said in tears. He was ahead, above everyone else, a real intellectual, a scientist. He probably could not even imagine that his son would not go to the institute. "Where are you going?" "To the dog shelter, washing bowls and cleaning up faces." "Mum." Mark's voice came through the phone as if his son were there. "At least there's no blackness, none at all, even when they're dying." "Well, you know all dogs go to heaven." The shelter was run by volunteers. There were only 1, 2, or 4 regular workers. Emma, who was considered the owner, was an attractive middle-aged blonde. She had a good voice, and from time to time she organized charity concerts in town. She sang to earn the dogs and cats some bread, or rather chicken carcasses, groats, and dry food. And then there was Mary, who cleaned the small little dogs that sat in separate cages. The cages stood on top of each other, and the whole thing looked like an open multi-story house. Mary kept order and had some veterinary skills. And finally there was Mark, who did all the heavy lifting. He was paid enough for food in a rented flat, a modest 1-bedroom. However, he was not always able to go there at night. 500 tailed souls lived in the shelter, and it often turned out that some of them could not be left unattended even for a few hours. The shelter was enclosed by a high, blank fence. It was located almost outside the city, in an industrial zone. There was no housing here. Still, many people had strong feelings about the shelter. Some people were disturbed by the very fact of its existence. These people demanded the destruction of all the inhabitants of the shelter, and sometimes even threw poison in pieces of meat over the fence. Others brought in dogs and cats that they could not keep for some reason. Sometimes they solved the issue honestly. They paid a fee. Sometimes they tried to drive up quietly, tied the dog at the gate, and left, saying that they would take the poor thing anyway. They wouldn't go anywhere. Just behind the fence there was a hut. It was considered to be Emma's office. But in fact, it served as a servant's quarters for everyone. There were refrigerators with dog food and medicines. Here the weakest puppies lived in boxes, and here the shelter duty officer, most often Mark, slept on the sofa. There was also a large structure that looked like a hangar. Small dogs lived in cages here and cats in a separate room. And in the courtyard there were enclosures close together, one to the other, with 2 big dogs in each enclosure. Morning was the time when it was impossible to sit down. Mark cooked food for the animals on the fire. The shelter had poor amenities. Even light and water were constantly cut off because of debts. If possible, water was stored in large bowls, and almost every day rats drowned in them, which could not be eradicated. Feed the animals, clean the cages, give injections to the sick, take someone to the vet. Time flew by. In the afternoon, volunteers, mostly schoolgirls, would arrive, and the lucky dogs would go for a walk with them. Hands were in short supply, and someone would get a chance to get out of their cage once every few months. Every dog and every cat had a hard fate behind them. Mark felt sorry for all of them, but he had a special relationship with Gerda, a sheepdog who came to the shelter last year. Later we learned that the owner had culled the dog because its ears did not stand up in due time. So as a teenager, Gerda found herself on the street. She joined a small pack of stray dogs. Together, in the jungle of the big city, it was easier to survive. She fell in love with the pack. Volunteers found the sheepdog in the winter. She hadn't left her mate for 24 hours. He was hit by a car and was still alive, slowly freezing. They took the dog to the clinic and gave the dogs names. He's Kai, she's Gerda. An emergency collection for treatment was announced, but Kai could not be saved. Gerda stayed at the shelter. Sheepdogs in general pick up everything on the fly, and Gerda eventually started to live out of her enclosure. She was so intelligent that she freely walked around the territory at night, guarding it. During the day, she watched out for strangers who came to the shelter, but never once bit anyone. For some reason, she chose Mark out of all of them and stayed near him, and somehow, in between, easily learned all the commands. And now, when Mark stayed overnight in the shed, he sat on the doorstep, watching the sunset, and Gerda lay at his feet. Maybe some people complained about the stale air around the shelter, too many dogs, no matter how much you cleaned, but Mark breathed easy here. He was used to seeing more than the others, and though he was used to it, he was often uneasy among people. In the shelter, those attentive eyes, hot breathing tongues, the hope to live another day, and the vast sky above his head. There were no high-rise buildings around the sky. Looked at the dogs, and many went there on their last journey because there were enough sick and crippled. Feeding, treating, placing in good hands, all this was hard work, and it occupied both hands and thoughts. This was Mark's place on Earth. The car pulled up in the evening. The first to hear it, of course, was Gerda. Seeing the dog's upturned muzzle, Mark listened too. Someone else has been brought in, he thought. Now they'll leave them and go away. If they're helpless puppies or kittens in a box, leave them outside overnight. They might live till morning. The hour was already quite late. Mark was lying on the sofa, watching a film of French comedy as old as this little TV set. As he was putting on his shoes, a car honked. Whoever was there wasn't going to run away quietly like a thief. Gerda, of course, had linked up with him to check the situation and make sure Mark wasn't in any danger. Near the gate, not far from the lilac bushes, you couldn't see them in the darkness, only the sweet smell could be heard, stood a black Jeep, and next to it a woman of small stature, with smoothly slicked back hair, also all in black jacket, jeans. Sometimes Mark sensed something unkind coming from the man, but it wasn't there now. But anxiety was born and grew. "Did you bring someone?" he asked, saying hello. "It would be better to do it this afternoon. There is a contract to be drawn up." "I'm here to see you, Mark," said the woman. Her voice was slightly hoarse, but what surprised Mark most of all was that she knew him by name. He had almost no acquaintances in town, outside the shelter, except for volunteers and veterinarians. "What did you want from me? Can we talk to you?" He caught the insistence in her voice and hesitated to ask her out. "There's a dozen puppies in the shed. Not every untrained person could handle it. To the dogs, they'd raise a fuss." "Let's get in the car," the woman said. She didn't switch on the interior lights, and when Mark sat down next to her, he could see her face in profile, lit only by the light of the moon. Gerda remained lying beside the car. "I wanted to offer you a job," said the woman. He was even more confused. "But I'm not going to leave here." She turned towards him. The darkness now completely hid her face, and only her eyes glittered slightly. "Mark, I'm not going to lure you away from the orphanage with tempting conditions. It's more serious than that. My husband and your father were once friends. I'm the only one who knows whose son you are, and God forbid anyone else should find out." She did manage to stun him. "Listen to what I have to say." She touched his hand. Her fingers were icy cold. "Your father's death has remained a mystery to the inquiry, hasn't it?" He didn't speak of what he'd discovered in the cemetery. He just nodded. "The investigators couldn't find out who was involved in James's death. All ends in water. It's a cult, Mark. It's the kind of force that shouldn't be allowed into our lives." The woman introduced herself. Her name was Isabella, and her husband, also now deceased, was Sam. She and James grew up together, went to medical school together. James was truly one of a kind. Such heightened sensitivity multiplied by knowledge. Disease has 1,000 subtle signs that even doctors don't always pay attention to. There's no way to put them all together. James saw, felt, anticipated. I don't remember him being wrong. 01759, my husband didn't have anywhere near that gift, but sometimes he had dreams. And yes, while your father was a surgeon, my husband was a psychiatrist. And so, the woman was silent, whether to cope with her feelings or to choose her words. At first it seemed that all these people, mostly young people, boys and girls, that they were just looking for extreme sports and had gone a little bit far where it was dangerous. They flocked from all over the world, even from Siberia, I think. I learned that later on by crumbs, by drops. The newcomers signed an agreement in blood, of course, that they renounced any faith and would serve only darkness. They met first at the home of one of these sectarians who lived on the outskirts of the city. Then they found a hut in the woods. Rituals, ceremonies, reading books on black magic. You see, Mark, you can't joke about this. Even with the occult aspects aside, it just makes you go crazy fast. And yes, they had sacrifices. They started with pets. And I won't tell you what they did to them. It'll hurt you to hear it. But eventually they got to humans. Firstly, once you joined the sect, you couldn't leave alive. Secondly, it was believed that if a person with a special gift was sacrificed, everyone who participated in the ritual would become stronger. So they searched for such unusual people. And of course they couldn't miss your father. And yes, he knew about it, knew they had sentenced him. So why didn't he go? How many were there? You mean the police? There's about 100 of them today, as far as I know. When you're dealing with fanatics of an idea, especially an idea like this, it's scary. What police? If you're sentenced, tomorrow on the street a random passerby will just stick a shiv in your side. Believe me, there will be a way. My husband took your father's death very hard. He said that the leaders of this sect were mentally ill, that they needed to be treated. There were cases he discouraged kids from going there, discouraged all those who were lured by this black romance. And he paid the price. He was next. He had a gift, too. James told Sam about your mum, so I've been following her life from afar, and I know who you are. And now my daughter's in danger. I think you're the only one who can protect her. Mark was released with great reluctance. It was only when he left unexpectedly and without any clear reason that it became clear how indispensable he was to the orphanage. Mark assured them he wasn't going for long. But he said it out of thin air, and he wasn't sure of anything. If Isabella was a wealthy woman, as he thought, she could hire a professional guard, or even a bodyguard for her daughter. He himself had no skills under his belt other than the army, where Mark had been trained as a signalman and had been allowed to shoot a machine gun once. What Isabella was hoping for was beyond his comprehension. I'll tell you more about it on the spot. She promised and added as a control shot. Please don't refuse, in memory of my father, in memory of their friendship with my husband. And now they were driving this very black Jeep, and looking through the tinted windows was literally seeing the world in black, as if he were deeply depressed. How did your husband die? Mark asked, because it was going to be a long journey and there was something to talk about. Isabella gripped the steering wheel tighter as the tarmac changed to dirt and the car shook. No big deal to anyone. I went to the dacha in early spring with my daughter, with Mia, and went fishing, and then they found him. He was lying face down in the water. We were told he'd suffocated. There was no water in his lungs. It was his heart. But couldn't that have happened? Lots of people have heart attacks. Why do you suspect someone? It's paranoia, isn't it? I'm too afraid for my daughter. Isabella said melancholically. All these years I've been following this sect as far as I can, even if indirectly, even if by word of mouth, but these guys have what they call their own handwriting. Do you understand? They offered both of them, first James, then Sam, to join them. If your dad wanted to, he could have made a career out of it. Imagine when one of their adepts can see through people, diagnose and heal, how cool that would be for them. After he flat out refused, he was warned since he didn't want to be a follower, he would become a victim. And then there was that final warning when he realized that it was serious, and that he was essentially condemned. That's when he met your mother. It's kind of a miracle that you were born, you know? And Sam was ruined by his tongue. He was mocking and openly trying to fight against them. I warned him against it. It was no use. When he left, for a while, I thought it was a coincidence too. A tragic accident. Of course, these guys wouldn't stop. Sacrifice is a regular ritual. And all those people, victims of fires that happened somewhere in the woods or in old abandoned houses, it's their work. But the other day, traditionally, with the onset of the warm season, the family would move to the cottage. This continued even after Sam's death. Lydia has her own firm. She is an interior designer and often went to the customers in the morning, and Mia was left alone. The garden community is small. It's quiet, grassy streets are deserted for part of the day. All the neighbors know each other, and a new person is immediately in sight. But Mia, lying in a hammock in the garden, was not alert when she saw a stubby boy, about her own age. He asked for a drink, and she let him draw water from their well. Even in the heat of the day, the water was cold and clear as a tear. "Don't you miss your father?" he asked, suddenly winking at her. "Don't be sad. You'll meet him soon." Isabella kept her daughter safe. She didn't tell her anything scary, anything that might frighten or upset her. That's why Mia didn't pay much attention to the conversation, but she passed it on to her mother. A strange man came in, and Isabella was terribly worried. They're going round and round, you see. They've got some kind of diabolical circle. The murders happen in the same places at roughly equal intervals. When these people target someone, they act with the tenacity of fanatics. They have to get what they want at all costs, you know. At any cost. There's no logic to it. Isabella slowed down and turned to Mark. Her voice sounded almost pleading. "Do you see why I came to you? Everywhere I go now, I get laughed at. Some boy asked for water and said something. But my husband's death has nothing to do with criminality in the eyes of everyone. What do you think of it? If there's no sign of violence." Sam was startled by something, startled to such a degree, so horrified that his heart stopped. That look on his face, then his features smoothed out. But I remember I saw him shortly after, and that's when it all started again. It was your mum, Mark, who told me about the gift you inherited from your father. Only it's gone further with you, you see more. Only you can sense trouble coming. I'm not asking you to get involved, God forbid. I'm not asking you to go into battle for my Mia, but to warn you, just to warn you, to hide her somewhere in time. They won't be after you. They know nothing about you, though you would no doubt be a very valuable asset to them. If you fall into their clutches, it's like falling into the clutches of a spider. You can't get out. They drug the victim, then scotch them. No one hears anything, and they don't find the victim right away. I only know you won't believe it, because thanks to your gift, what others can only laugh at is unquestionable to you. Gerda lay at Mark's feet, shifting her gaze from Isabella to her master and breathing hotly, sticking out her tongue. It was indeed a fertile corner. Isabella, with a special key, opened the gates of the garden community, and they seemed to enter a completely different world, where silence, emerald grass, birdsong, and negativity. On this day there were no dacha dwellers. Only one woman was digging up the soil on her plot, and a man was lying on the veranda on an old sofa, and his peace was rested by a dog, but good-natured it did not even bark at the car. Isabella's cottage struck Mark. It was something between a rustic cottage in the mountains somewhere in Europe and a medieval castle. A real tower of rough stone beckoned to the eye. "Wow," he said involuntarily. Isabella glanced round, grinned. "I like this place. There's a lake nearby, you'll see. But when I bought the land, it was all overgrown with wild grapes, and there was a half-collapsed hut hiding in it. Why a tower? I'm an extreme designer, and I've loved Bradbury since I was a kid. At the end of every spring I bought dandelion wine, and by autumn I'd read the book to death. I just breathed it. I learned to see the miracles in everything around me. Once a week, Douglas was allowed to sleep in his grandfather's tower. He'd run up the dark spiral staircase to the top and go to sleep in that magician's abode amidst thunder and visions. And in the early hours of the morning, when even the milkman was not yet clinking bottles in the streets, he would wake up and work his cherished magic. Now, Mia adores the place. At the very top of the tower, a platform opens up. There you can admire the moon and greet the dawn, or sometimes both at once. Mia calls the tower visiting the sky. Mia was thin and small. There was no way she could be 18 years old, a teenage schoolgirl, that's all. Gerda interested her much more than Mark. Already getting acquainted on the porch, she was ready to caress her, but hesitated. She won't bite, she's smart. So don't be afraid. They switched to you almost immediately, though. Isabella went to the kitchen to find something to feed the young people. Mark knew that by evening she would have to leave and spend the night in the city, because early in the morning she would be waiting for a client, an intrusive uncle who wanted to make everything in his mansion to the highest standards. I suggest green borscht. Isabella looked out of the kitchen. How's that? Mia, show Mark around the neighborhood, take him to the lake. For Gerda, getting to know the area was of the utmost importance. She walked ahead of the young people. Mark was not mistaken. This green corner was deserted at this hour, golden flowers on the grass and Mia walking on his right hand. The girl was walking with her head down, as if she wanted to find something among the grass and flowers. Mark didn't feel anything wrong yet. The day was too sunny, the breeze too warm and gentle. There was no room for shadows. From this edge of the fellowship was surrounded by a wooden fence, a rather dilapidated one, though. Micah ducked into a gap where a board had fallen off and waited for Mark to follow. Further on, beyond a small hill, there was a lake, marked on the maps as Pridorojnoy, though it was quite far from any roads, and just beyond the lake the forest began. Dakniks came here to catch small fish or just sit by the water. They took good photos here. The lake was small, but framed by the forest and weeping willows, it was picturesque. However, Mark's heart was suddenly racing. He saw several butterflies, big black beauties, fluttering over the water. Mark even blinked, hoping it was a vision, that he was just overheating in the sun. They couldn't be here. He had once looked up the species in a book and had learnt that they lived somewhere else. But he'd seen them several times before the news of someone's sudden death. "What do you think?" he asked Maya after all, nodding at that black dance. If she had seen it too, she would have said something like, "How beautiful." "The boys are swimming here." Mia shrugged her shoulders. "I tried it once and lost my footing. The bottom was too boggy. They say there's a ford somewhere. I don't know where." They settled down on the bank, right on the grass, dry and warm. Mark didn't know if he could ask Mia. Did she know anything about what she was facing? Was she afraid? But as it turns out, children know more than their parents realize. Mia started this conversation on her own. "I know why your mom called you." She wasn't looking at Mark, she was looking at the lake. "But I don't think it's worth it. There's some serious guys out there. What are you going to do with them? Even with the dog." "What makes you think they're so serious?" he asked with deliberate carelessness. "You see, Mum can keep her mouth shut, but not that serious. When she started asking me questions, she let something slip. And then I did what I could on my own. They just don't accept the weak. They have a whole series of entrance tests. The marathon not to run, but to walk with heavy rucksacks through the mountains. Not everyone made it, but they have a death cult. They are not afraid of it. You can't die, you can't play in all this, you can't immerse yourself in it, the darkness will pull you in." Who would you say that to? Mark thought. And then the epic continues. They order their own knives. Like personal, magical knives. There are special blacksmiths there too, with runes and signs on the knives. And each of them has to drink blood with his knife, choose it himself, catch it and sacrifice someone. Gerda raised her head and looked at the girl carefully. Mia rubbed her head, dared her. At least a bird or a cat. There is a real gradation of victims. Forest animals are valued higher because they are harder to catch. Try to catch one, even a hare. And the highest sacrifice is a human. Mia looked Mark straight in the eye. The ultimate sacrifice is yourself. When you don't make an attempt on someone, but lie down on the altar yourself. Isabella fed him a delicious green borscht and left a fridge full of food. "I'll try to be here tomorrow evening, the day after tomorrow at the earliest. I know Mia doesn't bother with cooking, at least make yourself some sandwiches and coffee. I'll leave the cutlets in the pot under the lid. Please." Now she was talking to Mark. "Lock the gate well at night." They met sunsets in the tower, or rather at the very top, on the platform Mia had chosen. They drank coffee, watched the sun sink behind the lake. "It's a full moon tonight," Mia said. "I don't know if they believe in anything other than their sect and who they think is their master. I read a book about vampires when I was a kid. It said that vampires loved moonlit nights, and that they followed the moonbeams like a river." Mark was busy with a more mundane task. He opened a satellite map and studied his surroundings, slowly moving his finger over the map on his mobile screen. "Is that a swamp?" he wondered, pointing to where the holiday village ended. "Not exactly. It's boggy, but it's not really a swamp. Except in spring, when the water stands for a long time, and in autumn it all thins out. But in summer the ground dries up and there are so many flowers there." "What's this?" Mark pointed his finger. "A settlement. Look, there seems to be a path leading there, quite far from here, and I don't know whether there are houses or not." "It's not a path, it's a concrete road, a slab road. And where you're pointing, there used to be a village there. It's almost gone now, just ruins. I know that a man lived there for a long time, hiding from his wife. He said he was happy there. It was quiet." "How do you know all this?" "My father used to take me there on his motorbike. He was hoping to find the treasure. Dad had this romanticism in him. There's a mountain or a hill about 60 meters high. There's lowlands all around. And when you get to the hill, you can see everything. Dad said there's a whole network of caves and underground passages. God knows who dug them and when. It was either an underground monastery or a hiding place for bandits. Papa was always very careful that I didn't stumble or fall into anything. And he made me promise that I would never go there alone, because if anything happened there would be no help. No one would even know where you had disappeared. I don't know why Dad thought that. I wouldn't have gone myself, it's too far. Did you love your father very much? Unexpectedly to himself, Mark asked. It was already evening light, but it seemed to him that she had tears in her eyes. Maya nodded. Very much. Most of all, Mum is nice, but she always has things to do, always has her head full. And for my father, I knew there was no one more important than me. Do you remember your father? I've only seen pictures of him. He was quite a famous man. More than famous. Mia confirmed it. Do you have those weird eyes? You know, they're like mirrors. It seems that just a little more and something so otherworldly will be reflected in the mirrors or windows to another world. She shifted her gaze and shuddered. Look over there. She pointed towards the lake, where the darkness had already thickened. What is there? Mark lowered his voice involuntarily and wished they were still at the top of the tower, out in the open. Look at those green lights. There's two. Fireflies, maybe? They're small. I couldn't see them from up here. It's far away. You mean eyes? Mark might have wanted to make a mocking tone in his voice to cheer the girl up, but the question sounded serious against his will. No, not eyes. Maybe it was a torch. Let's get out of here. You go to your room and I'll check the gate again. And then Gerda and I will go round the estate. The dog hasn't felt threatened yet. Maybe the key word was yet. But Mark sat in Mia's room for a long time, and she told him what she had learned. About how a willing victim spends his last night among the sectarians, about the farewell ceremony and the actual sacrifice and such horrors. Finally, he noticed that the girl's eyes were beginning to slip. When he came to himself, however, he went back to the satellite maps for some reason, found the very same hill and zoomed in, as if hoping to see some traces of life there, or at least the very caves. Mark woke up to the fact that the room was cold. It was not uncommon to have frost in the morning. Now the wind must have opened the window, and Mark felt cold. Gerda put her paws on the windowsill. It was just beginning to dawn, and the sheepdog was looking out into the twilight and shivering visibly. Mark got up to shut the window more quickly, rubbed the dog on the withers, saying that now we would warm up. But Gerda was still shivering. Without realizing why, Mark went out into the corridor. The front door was closed. But as soon as the young man touched the handle, the door opened into the dark garden. Someone had opened the English lock. Mark started quickly up the stairs. He had not yet called out to the girl, though he would very much like to do so. So what if everything is safe and Mia is asleep and he wakes her up? He quietly opened the door to her room. Gerda slipped past him, and he didn't have time to stop her. The room was empty, only the white crumpled bed, the window closed. Gerda was sniffing at something on the floor. Mark crouched down and, not believing himself, touched a smeared spot of blood. They ran towards the lake, Mark following the sheepdog. The grass was damp with icy dew, the branches wet. The lake at this hour was like silver mirrors. They've crossed it, Mark thought, to break the trail. But how did they get Mia out with a knife to her throat? Not a peep then. He gazed. There was a black line drawn precisely on the water. The butterflies had lined up, marking the ford with their wings. On the other side of the lake, Gerda had picked up the trail at once, but he would have found the way without her. He had looked at the map too long and too closely the day before to be mistaken. It was a concrete road, old, not wide, 2 slabs only. Between these slabs, grass was already growing thickly. At first, the road led him to a river, over which there was a bridge, a plank bridge, over which a car could pass. On the other bank were trees, huge trunks of trees uprooted, their roots intertwined and twisted, and from afar they looked like giant spiders blocking the way. Mark knew he had a long way to go. He had no doubt where Mia had been taken. It would take him hours to get there, and he would have to listen every minute to see if anyone was around. And he couldn't wait. Mark had brought his phone with him, but but it was of little use here. The connection was not catching an empty white triangle in the corner of the screen. Not a single bar. Gerda realized that her master was in a hurry. She was ready to break off into a run, but then she would break away from him. She went far ahead, and she walked beside him, and Mark walked quickly, then switched to a run. The sun was already beginning to rise, showing its red side from behind the horizon, when Mark reached the abandoned village. It was a sad sight. 700 people had once lived here, but there were few reminders of it anymore. The shrubbery had grown so high that it hid the shrubberies, which had fallen into disrepair. Only the roofs were visible, and the streets were still visible. One might have thought that this place would attract those who practiced a death cult. But Mark felt there was no one here. To turn on and there would be a lake, the shores of which were so favored by vipers that it would be better not to go there without boots. To the protected mountain. The way lay straight ahead. Only the concrete ended here and there was only a path left. Now he had to be doubly careful. It was already light, and they were close. Whenever possible, Mark tried to walk at the edge of the forest without losing sight of the path, and when he noticed a long, high hill ahead, he retreated into the thicket. It was a place that all the locals tried to avoid. It was tempting, though there was a rumor that untold riches were hidden here. Who kept them here? Who knows? Bandits. Who else? But who? According to some rumors, those whose ataman was Stenka Razin, according to others, the companions of Imli and Pugashav. And whoever said it all started with the old believers. They inhabited the local caves, deepened them, and then gave permission to those who came here to escape from the authorities, or just from the evil baron to settle in the neighborhood. It happened that the robbers stayed here for the winter, and in the spring they left for their criminal activities on the big water. But who settled in the caves now? When Mark saw the smoke, he crawled the last few meters rather than walked. Gerda knew the command to crawl perfectly well and breathed noisily. In a few minutes, Mark was already looking at the sight before him. Mia had said, like her mother, that there were about 100 people in this sect, or what the hell to call it. But now Mark noticed 12 too. For some reason, it reminded him of all the reenactment clubs. Right at the foot of the mountain, there was a fire, but not a strange one, not a sacrificial one, but just warming and cooking breakfast. And someone didn't care much about firewood. They used dried-out wood. That's why there was smoke from it. Many of the guys were really strong physically, even outwardly it was noticeable, were dressed in some strange gray hoods or cloaks of coarse cloth. Maybe such clothes were practical here. They protected them from the morning cold and annoying midges. And they were not sorry to get dirty or burnt by sparks from the fire. But only the Middle Ages came to mind, with its bonfires and the mad eyes of fanatics. A very thin man with gray hair grown back below his shoulders was stirring the brew in a cauldron. He was older than the others, and much older. Perhaps he was the head of the sect. But Mark dismissed the thought. It was unlikely that the master would be serving the others, preparing their breakfast. What Mark hadn't expected was that the man would suddenly raise his eyes and look exactly where he was hiding in the dense foliage, and seemingly, despite such a veil, would see him. It was a total, absolute failure. And if he now called out to these boys and pointed in the direction where the stranger lurked, Mark would not escape or hide, and neither will Gerda. What will a dog do against so many people? It won't even stop them. And worst of all, no one and nothing will be able to save Mia. The man looked at him without taking his eyes off and seemed to have even dropped the spoon he was holding in his hand. Mark was also used to trusting his senses. This time he didn't feel threatened. Not only that, but he had a growing feeling that he knew this man from somewhere, even though it was impossible. Judging by his appearance, the man hadn't been out of the forest for a long time. And then the stranger's features seemed to overlap with a photograph in his memory, the one his mother had shown him. Mark blinked his eyes a lot. Wasn't James coming from the other side of the world? Or had he, after all? The man stood up and took a few steps toward Mark and suddenly put a finger to his lips. It was a gesture of invitation, saying, "Shay shall come to you now and we'll talk." Mark nodded. It was dangerous, though, terribly dangerous. Maybe the man only wanted to calm his guard and then get close, grab his shoulder with his strong fingers, and then call the others. James, or whoever it was, took his time walking toward the thicket. There was no telling what the man was up to. It was only when the branches closed behind him and Mark was 2 steps away that the man squatted down beside him and asked, "Who are you? Who are you?" was the first thing that came to Mark's mind. "I recognized you by your eyes." James said quietly. My grandfather had eyes like that. He raised his hand, wanting to touch Mark's eyelids, but didn't. Not just gray, but like molten metal. My grandfather, too, saw things that no one else could. Your mom's Kelly, isn't she? So if I'm your son, Mark whispered. And you're really alive, why the hell have you been stuck here for so many years? Or have you gone crazy too and become one of them? I haven't gone mad. James was so thin that his eyes seemed to have sunken deep. It was just that they needed me alive then, to keep me with them. And they made it clear to me that if I didn't agree, the people closest to me would suffer. Sooner or later they would have found out about your mom and got to her. So what did you do with them? I treated them. I needed that kind of help here too. They also demanded to tell them everything I know about psyche hypothesis, about human superpowers. They hoped that I would teach them to be like myself, to develop the same abilities in them. And what happened? It sounded venomous, but James only grinned faintly. You know better than anyone that you're born with this gift, and it doesn't come from a black master. After all these years, you couldn't escape? There are guys here with a very unhappy and broken fate. Maybe it was pity that kept me here for a long time, but I tried to escape once. So, failed caught, beaten up, and I was tracked for a long time. You decided to stay with them, even after they'd killed your friend? Arseny shuddered and said quietly, they didn't literally kill him, they wanted him to go with them, to live here. They showed him me on the phone, beaten up, while I was lying in a blackout. Anyway, he couldn't take it. I don't know the details. It must have been the heart. Who's in charge? He didn't introduce himself. I won't tell you his real name. They call him Karacourt here. He's completely mentally ill. He'd have to be on heavy medication, but that's why. Because of his weirdness, he's considered second to God. I mean, after the devil. What about you? James apparently wanted to ask what had brought Mark here, but his son beat him to it. So it's this Karacourt who's going to sacrifice Mia, the daughter of your best mate, tonight. Why don't you give him the knife? Will you hold a torch to the fire? James flinched, and Mark realized he didn't know who Mia was. Go over there, further into the woods, James said. There's some sort of hunting lodge there, and wait. I don't know how long, maybe a long time, but I'll get her there for you. Why should I believe you? Mark asked. Arseny was silent for a few moments, then said sadly, what else can you do? Mark found the hunting lodge without difficulty, a small, old log cabin, where the two of them would have been cramped. No one had lived here for a long time, and it smelled rotten and damp inside. He let Hertha run round the neighborhood, and the sheepdog found a barely visible stream, from which they drank with pleasure, first the dog, then the master. The day was already drawing towards evening. There was still nothing to think of contacting the larger world, and Mark's spirits grew heavier and heavier. It was unlikely that Mia would be kept here for 2 whole nights. Most likely, everything would be resolved in a few hours. It would be much easier for them to drop off a body burnt beyond recognition than to hide a live girl, who of course would be searched for. Her mother would bring everyone to their feet. But now everything depended on one man, on Arseny, and he didn't seem quite normal to Mark either. How could one live for years among these ghouls and keep his sanity? Gerda was the first to hear the approach of the strangers. She jumped up, frozen like a statue. Mark put his palm on her withers. Quiet. He didn't want the dog to give them both away by barking or whimpering. James led Mia in front of him. She was barely walking. He was supporting her by the shoulder, and she too was wearing some kind of gray robe. The girl was unlike her self-tangled hair, a blank stare. What's wrong with her? Mark intercepted Mia. She's just been drugged. Can you smell it? And a bit of dope. She's been told she's going to be killed anyway, and this will make it easier for her to accept the inevitable. Now, get her in as fast as you can. But how will she walk in that condition? Mark asked, almost desperately. It's a long way. No one will chase you for a while. I promise. Stay close to the river, and as soon as you get a connection, call for help. Maybe they'll intercept you halfway down. What about you? If there's a willing victim, it's their favorite, James said nonchalantly, and before Mark could say anything, he was gone, disappearing into the fading twilight. One thing was certain: over the years, even in this monstrous environment, he'd had those who were indebted to him, whose favor he'd won and who felt affection for him. It was because of this that he had now succeeded in getting Mia out. He sat alone until late in the evening, in the very cave where the condemned had spent their last hours, praying to himself that his son and his mate would reach the humans safely. Occasionally he sipped from a jug of the wine that was generously served to the prisoners. Better to let them go to the altar like somnambulas than to drag them screaming like pigs. James didn't think about himself. To be honest, he didn't want to live either. His body had survived, but his soul had been burned almost to the ground. A willing sacrifice in the eyes of the other members of the cult that justified everything. James knew that Karacourt would go ballistic. That was what happened when James was eventually brought to him. The ringleader didn't grovel to the caves. He was the only one here who had a dwelling. Psychiatry was the subject James had been worst at the Institute. But looking into those eyes, black and seemingly pupilless, and watching this extremely pale man swallow saliva that dripped down his chin, James had no doubt that he belonged in the ward behind the iron door with the bars on the window. You let her go so they could find their way to us and wipe us all out. Ends in the water. The river's close by. Consider me sorry for the girl. It's better than what you were going to do to her. James said. You took her from us. If his voice softened, it was only a little. I'll replace her. James reached out his hand towards the ajar door, and someone put a torch in it. He knew who it was: Sophia, the girl who had come to the cult last. She still couldn't get used to it. Everything longed for her mother. James raised the torch, illuminating the hut, where a single candle still burned and darkness crowded the corners. Now it was spellbound brightly. All that scary tinsel animal skins, rat skulls, acculturation books, all those black candles. The other boys still had a chance to get out. James had told his son the truth. There wasn't a person here who hadn't been broken by life one way or another. But there was only one crazy person here. You and I would make excellent victims, he said almost affectionately to the madman. James knew what was happening this minute: Sophia locking the door from the outside. Who, us? It would have been clear to anyone long ago. Karacourt still didn't understand. You and me, James explained to him. Your master has been waiting for you for a long time. He ran his hand along the walls. Old wood, how glorious it will burn. But it doesn't work like that. It's not time for me to go to the bonfire yet. The Karacourt's voice was already hysterical. James tried the torch on the towel over there, or on the robe hanging on the nail. The Karacourt rushed to the door, but James blocked his way. At first he thought it was sparks spraying from his eyes, but then he saw something out the window he'd never seen here before: the flashing beacons on police cars. Karacourt was beating on the locked door with both palms and screaming. James, on the other hand, stood with his torch down, barely able to keep his feet. He closed his eyes, relief making him want to cry. Emily opened her eyes. She felt the dirt under her fingernails and the cold, damp earth. The sensations came into her mind, not all at once, but one at a time, as if there were a narrow door that only one at a time could slip through. Emily grimaced in pain as a bright light shone in her face. It came and went. There was a terrible headache. That was the second thing she felt. Then the girl realized that she was terribly cold, so much so that she could barely feel her own body. The thought shook her so much that Emily tried to get up. She looked around, birds cawing, dirt, cold, earth and grass with huge crosses everywhere. Realizing that she was in a cemetery, she began to breathe frequently. Panic set in. For a while, Emily couldn't even remember her own name. Then she realized who she was, but she didn't know where or why. She looked around and realized she was at the grave of her late husband. He had died only 2 years ago, but the memory of it hurt her every time. He had an ordinary grave, a black fence, a monument with a photograph, simple gray, no frills. Behind the monument was a wooden cross. Emily sighed. At least something made sense. Suddenly her gaze fell on the knoll of earth next to Michael's grave. He hadn't been here before. Who was buried so close to her husband? She looked closer and saw herself in the picture. It was impossible to make out the image in detail in the dark. But she remembered this picture of herself well. It was on her profile on all of her social media accounts. Lowering her gaze, Emily saw her name. Emily Johnson. With fear, the girl began to gulp air with her mouth. At that moment, she heard some noise very close by. When she saw two short silhouettes right behind her, She flinched and started to crawl back. Her short black hair was disheveled. She was wearing a black dress, no shoes, just black socks on her feet stained with dirt. "Don't be afraid of me," the boy behind her with the flashlight said quietly and calmly. He was the one shining the light into her eyes. A large dog sat next to him. "Who are you? Why am I here?" Emily asked fearfully. Her voice was weak and trembling. Nausea began to set in, and a severe pain appeared in her head. Panic was building. "I don't know. Buddy and I came here. My friend Grandpa Frank used to work here in the cemetery. He used to let me take all sorts of goodies from the graves. People leave them. And he said they put candy for people like me. I'd eat them, and some dead relative of theirs would smile in heaven, just like that." His words didn't make it any clearer. Emily looked apprehensively at the huge dog. It was acting friendly, wagging its tail and looking at the boy. He looked to be about 12 years old, blonde, a little overweight, with slanted blue eyes and rosy cheeks. He wore a yellow jacket and a black hat. The jacket was a little small for him. "I don't understand," Emily said. "I told you Uncle Frank let me take candy, but that's from the graves. And today I came in and they told me he was gone, that he was sick and couldn't work anymore. He's been replaced by his replacement. He's angry and drinks. He wanted to send me away, but I tricked him, pretended to leave, and came back. Grandpa Frank showed me a long time ago where there's a crawl space on the north side. Me and my buddy went in and started collecting candy, and he heard you. I didn't realize it at first, and he started digging your grave. I couldn't pull him away. He's digging at me like a real builder, what he's talking about, and I started to help him. It turned out you were buried shallow. The coffin was open and right on the surface. Grandpa Frank told me all the dead people are buried 2 meters deep. It was right next to here when a friend dug up a little bit of your grave. I heard you standing there too, realized you were alive and opened the coffin lid. It wasn't boarded up. How should it be? Emily was horrified. Who buried her? Why? It was hardly an accident. If the coffin hadn't even been pinned up properly and buried deep. How are you not afraid to walk around here alone and dig up groupies? She asked. I'm used to the cemetery by now. Grandpa Frank used to say you shouldn't be afraid of the dead. You should be afraid of the living. But I haven't seen the living dead yet. Of course, yeah, Emily rose to her feet. Her whole body shook with cold. When I opened the coffin, you started climbing out right away. That's when I got a little scared. It was creepy. And then you lay there for a long time, like an hour. Come with me. I live nearby. I'll warm you up with tea. Just be quiet. My stepfather won't let me bring anyone. Emily nodded. She had nowhere else to go. She followed the boy, her friend running beside her, wagging his tail happily. Her rescuer's name was Bobby. His mom had died 7 years ago. He didn't even remember her. He was already living with his stepdad. He was a very bossy man. He'd fix anything, help anyone, but he drank a lot. Sent the kid out to pick up alcohol from graves. That's how Bobby became friends with the caretaker. Grandpa Frank taught the kid to be sneaky, saying they don't let him in the cemetery with alcohol now. They only let you keep candy. That's what the boy did to keep his stepfather from drinking. But of course, it didn't help much. They lived badly, poorly. Since he was little, Bobby was able to wash and iron and cook for himself, and also fed his stepfather from childhood. The boy had no childhood. Emily learned all this in the short time it took them to walk to his private little house. The cemetery was far outside of town. She'd been there often since her husband's death, but after a year she'd been less frequent. She needed to let him go and learn to move on. Emily promised herself to go there no more than 3 times a year, on Michael's birthday, the date of his death, and her wedding anniversary. For the past year, she dutifully kept her promise, and she wasn't supposed to be here until March of the following year, but somehow she'd managed to die on November 8th. How that had come about was a mystery. Her memory gave out information about the last days of her life selectively, in fragments. She couldn't remember the last events, but she didn't want to go back to the city to her apartment yet. There was little chance that she had been mistaken for dead, so she thought. Then she would be given a proper burial. Emily sat in the outhouse where Bobby had brought her, drinking hot tea. The boy wrapped himself in a blanket and sat beside her. A friend she often wiped his paws on before letting him indoors. This child was overly responsible for his years. I saw in a movie that a certain uncle was killed, and to avoid confessing to the crime, they buried him. Maybe that's what happened to you too, Bobby suggested. He was sitting close by. There was a dim light bulb on in the outhouse, and it was warm, but not warm enough to take off his jacket. On the wall hung photographs and Bobby's childhood drawings. In the corner was the usual garland of colorful bulbs. No, I'm buried next to my husband. He died 2 years ago. So whoever buried me knew me, Knew where my husband was buried, Emily thought. Michael sighed heavily. The boy settled on the mat on the floor. Won't your stepfather come in here? Emily asked. No, he's drunk again. You don't have to wait for him tonight. He'll wake up for lunch, sore, yelling at me, just like he always does. The neighbors have already called social services. I lived in an orphanage for 6 months, but he made a deal with someone. He took me back. He needs the child benefits that pay for me, and when he drinks, he says I look like my mom and he loves me. Except he doesn't care about me. He did when I was little, but not well. I was often sick. Neighbors nursed me back to health. Grandma Tisha lived across the wall from us. She's dead now. But she used to consider me her grandson. Helped my father raise me. She told me a little bit about my mom. When my grandmother died, I was 9. And then I became an adult and independent. I can be responsible for myself now. I still have a little bit left. I want to grow up soon, Bobby said. Emily smiled. She wanted to say, don't be in a hurry to grow up. Childhood is wonderful, but adulthood is full of challenges and worries, but that wasn't the case with Bobby. He had already grown up, but he hadn't grown up yet. He had had a difficult childhood, and adulthood was bound to make up for it. It should give him a loving, caring wife, children, friends, and he should never have to fight against the world alone, picking candy from graves and listening to his drunken stepfather. Emily sighed, looking at the boy. Time will fly by quickly. You'll see, she told him, and smiled. They talked for about an hour. Bobby was an extremely talkative young man and very bright. As she talked to him, her memory began to come back to her. She looked at the chubby cheeks of the boy with the beautiful blue eyes, and scraps of the last day flashed before her mind's eye. She remembered Jessica and the fact that she had tried to help her. Emily and Jessica had been best friends since college. They had bonded and quickly found common ground, being two against all odds, trusted each other unconditionally. When Emily met Michael, Jessica was jealous, but found it in herself to be happy for her friend, as she usually was. Their meetings became infrequent. They were replaced by the daily routine of married life. Emily was happy. She was glowing. The only sad part was that she and Michael never got to have children. When he died, Emily turned gray with grief, trying to take her own life. Jessica got there just in time, supported her friend the whole time, and they became close again. 2 days ago, Jessica had to drop her off at a fortune teller she knew for the second time. It's been a year. You still haven't recovered, Jessica was saying. Is that all normal? No, not normal, her friend argued. You need to say goodbye to your husband and move on with your life. This woman can talk to the dead. It's not like a cheap TV show. She really connects with them, sometimes giving people details that only their deceased loved ones could know about. Charges a lot for her services, but only if she manages to contact the person. She says not everything is in the public domain. Some people are allowed to talk to her, and others are forbidden. You know, it's awfully interesting. I was in contact with her myself when my grandfather died. She calmed me down and told me that he said hello and asked me not to get into his gear, to wipe the fishing rods clean of dust, and rather fish like he did. She said he is with his grandmother now, and they are arguing again. Said his whole family is there, and he is happy to see me and know there is no death and no eternal separation. I looked at the world differently after that. Oh, nonsense, Emily replied dejectedly. But you're just torturing yourself with guilt. You can't do that. So you had a fight. Who doesn't? How can you beat yourself up like that? The day before Michael died, Emily was jealous of him. She'd long thought he was hiding something. Dark, she became suspicious. She found an outgoing text message on his phone to an unknown number. You too, of course, she thought some woman had texted Michael saying she loved him, and he erased her message and so replied, only he didn't have time to delete his own reply. She saw it. Michael claimed that the number belonged to his coworker, his boss, and congratulated him on the fact that the bonus would be at the end of the month. And he wrote you too to congratulate her, because she would be getting a bonus for overtime. Emily wouldn't make a big deal out of nothing, but this was not the first time she felt he was cheating on her. Every time there was some excuse, and she couldn't prove anything. She thought she was going crazy with jealousy, blamed herself. But that night she couldn't help herself. She tried to push Michael. He got angry, yelled at her, and left. They had a motorboat. They lived near the river. The boat was later found wrecked, and he was reported missing. But they said, dead don't get your hopes up. Emily stopped living when Michael was gone. She stopped believing in God and the devil. She lived out of inertia just because she had to live. She came from a wealthy family. She didn't need money. She hired a psychologist and worked with him, but not for long. He kept making her cry, reminiscing, hurting her, and she just stopped going to his sessions. 2 days ago, Jessica picked Emily up. and after work, they got in her car. They drove out of town. The same fortune teller was going to tell them something important about her husband. The first session Jessica had dragged her friend hadn't gone very smoothly. It was over a week ago. The elderly grandmother with the piercing brown eyes said that Michael was angry. He hadn't forgiven Emily and was asking her to explain herself. Emily didn't know how to respond. He said so. Not me, the fortune teller excused herself. Jessica paid for the session. It had been her idea. Emily refused to go. He was harsh on me too. That day, Michael could just calm down, explain. If that text wasn't for a mistress, then why did he refuse to call that number in front of me? I know his coworker. I would have recognized her voice. I've had my suspicions for a long time, and with his death, they haven't gone away. It's only gotten worse. We had a very bad breakup. Emily started crying. Michael said, "You had no right to be jealous." Emily sensed something was wrong. Michael was always reconciling after a fight. She was sure that if he hadn't died in the motorboat accident, they would have reconciled and forgotten all about it. She even considered not to forgive him at first. The quarrel was not good, left a residue, and suspicions had long tormented her. She wanted clarity. She wanted to know the truth, to believe, but she couldn't. The last thing she remembered. Jessica talked her into going to that fortune teller again. She didn't want to because she'd left her in tears last time. "We should go. She won't take any money. She says Michael didn't tell her everything, that he's keeping her awake and making her contact you. Let's go. It's free. What have you got to lose? If you don't believe me, don't believe me. Let's just hear her out and go. And put it behind us. And maybe you'll feel better after what she said." Emily agreed. She got into the car with her friend. What happened next was hazy. Jessica gave Emily some salted peanuts. Half an hour later, she was thirsty. "I have a thermos of tea lying in the back seat." "Yeah, sure," Jessica tossed over her shoulder. She was focused on the road. Emily decided to take a sip from the thermos. One, another, a third. "It tastes weird." "What is it?" she asked. "Kazakhstani tea. Very good, healthy, some kind of herbs." That's all I could remember. After that tea, there was a complete memory lapse. It was as if she hadn't even realized how she'd blacked out. One thing became clear. Jessica couldn't have had anything to do with her fake funeral. "What's on your mind all of a sudden?" Bobby asked. The boy had been staring at her in silence for several minutes now. Emily shook her hair. The black dye was visibly disheveled. It was creepy for her to be in a black funeral dress, but needing to figure out what had happened. I remembered everything she said slowly. Remembered what? What? Emily told the boy the events of the last few days. She spoke simply so as not to offend him with her silence. After all, he was the one who had dug her out with his dog and brought her in warmly and gave her tea. Emily was still coming around. The drowsiness and weakness in her body had only gotten worse. "You just don't go back there. What if that Jessica wanted to kill you?" "Yeah, she miscalculated. Maybe she planted arsenic." Emily shuddered. She felt sick, like she'd been poisoned. Could it be true? But the thought of her best friend wishing her harm seemed unbearable to Emily. Her thin fingers encompassed the mug of tea. My head hurt. I didn't even know if I'd have to go back anyway. I wasn't dead. And it's not clear what's left in the cemetery. I'll pick it up tomorrow, and no one will notice. Are you moving it here? I'll go inside. He might wake up. He'll fight again. The last time I was outside, the social services came to see him. He gave me such a beating. I said I'd be home before dark. I hope he's still asleep. Bobby went inside, saying he'd be home in the morning. He left the dog on the doorstep. The dog had been taught commands and obeyed his little master without question, and Bobby never left his friend hungry. Even at the worst times, he found a treat for him in the trash cans, and for himself, too. During the night, the memories that her psyche must have separated from her mind for a while came flooding back. If she had just slept in unconsciousness until her release, it wouldn't have been so bad yet. But Emily began to remember waking up in the coffin. She was nauseous. The lack of oxygen was pressing in her head. The slight fear gripped her entire being. All night long, those memories made her shudder with terror. There was nothing more terrifying than a death like this. Emily's parents had died years ago. She had been an orphan, and Jessica had been the nearest and dearest person to her for a long time. Could she have done this to her? Or was it an accident? But then why did they bury her so ridiculously, superficially? There were too many oddities in all this. It couldn't have been an accident. In the morning, she heard her stepfather yelling at Bobby. She wanted to stand up for him, but she cried most of the night. And she felt terrible when the yelling stopped. Bobby came into the outhouse with his dog. "I brought you some waffles. Do you want some?" he asked. Emily shook her head. She would have to go to the hospital, get checked out, find out, at the very least, what had caused her death and why in heaven there had been a cancellation. "Thank you. I'll be coming back. I have my own apartment in the city after all. I have somewhere to go." "What if someone lives there now, one of the people who wanted to kill you? Let me go and find out. I'll ask the neighbors. I'll tell them you helped me before, and no one will suspect a thing. Will you at least know how you died and who buried you?" Emily shrugged. She explained to Bobby how to find her apartment. "Only I don't have the money to even get you a ride." "Yeah, well, they put you in the coffin without a wallet. But don't worry. I'm harebrained," he smiled. "What if you get caught?" Bobby squinted slyly. "I have a conductor I know who doesn't charge me. Always gives me a treat, too. I was walking my dog once, and a dog jumped him, and my dog protected him, chased the dog away. We've been friends ever since. He showed me to everyone on the route. So I get a free ride into town, and from there, too." "Wow," Emily marveled. "Wait a minute, you don't go. If anyone comes," Hyde said Bobby. "Okay," Emily nodded. She was feeling sleepy. Bobby was saying basically the right things, reasoning like an adult. She wanted to trust someone right now. She slept in the outhouse for 2 hours before she jumped up at the rumbling. "Who the hell are you?" A huge, bearded man loomed over her. Emily realized it was Bobby's stepfather. "Hello, my name is Emily." She threw back the blanket and staggered to her feet. The man saw her face in the light and started to stagger back. "And that's you." You Emily didn't understand. His face didn't look familiar to her. "I'm sorry, Bobby let me hang around. I'll be leaving soon. It's just that I'm in trouble. You can't be alive." Emily thought the man had white fever. He reeked of alcohol. "I'm going to leave right now. Let me go." The boy's stepfather stood in the doorway, his whole demeanor making it clear he wouldn't let go. His gaze was crazed, fear and something else in it. Something evil. Emily saw a stick on the floor and grabbed it. She swung it at the man, but he didn't bat an eyebrow. "Let go or I'll hit you. I want to leave. I didn't take anything from you. I was just cold. Let me go." I'll scream. She began to choke with panic. The man took a step towards her. Emily tried to hit him, but he snatched the stick, threw it away, and hugged the girl. She thought he was going to molest her, but he only cried. "What's the matter with you? Let me go." "Emily, honey, is that you? Tell me it's you. I've been so sick without you." Emily raised her face to him and looked into his eyes. "I don't know you." "And you haven't lost your memory?" he asked, looking at her hopefully. He still had his arm around her. "No, you have me confused with someone else." "Now, wait." He stepped out and locked her inside. Emily decided she had to get out, but the door to the outhouse was locked very firmly and the window had bars. She couldn't get out. Soon the man came back. "You're sorry, okay? Don't be afraid of me. I'm not crazy. Here, look at this." He held out a picture to her. Emily recognized herself in it. Except she'd never had that haircut, never had those clothes, and she'd never been to the place where the photo had been taken. "Who's that?" "That's you, isn't it? Look at it. It's not like I'm crazy." Emily stared at the picture for a long time. "Yeah, it's really weird. She looks a lot alike." "She doesn't look like her. She's a copy." The mole on her cheek. "Look. Is there such a coincidence? You have a voice like hers, too." I loved her. Emily was Bobby's mother. She's dead. A long time ago. This is the only picture I have of her. I didn't give it to Bobby so he wouldn't play Beria as a memory. "My name's John, by the way." "You're Emily." My head hurt like hell. Still nauseous, but intermittently thirsty. She told John about who she was, where she was born and raised. She was 17 when her parents died. Her uncle had looked after her for 6 months until she came of age, then left for Poland, where he was from. The rich heiress was left all alone, not knowing what to do with her parents' inheritance. She decided to study, and she went where she could enter herself and did not tell anyone that she had $1 million in her accounts. Even Jessica didn't know for a while, and when she found out, she said that she respected her decision to dispose of her parents' fortune wisely, not rashly. She'd never been jealous, never asked for a loan. They were friends, ignoring the fact that Emily could afford anything. And Jessica had a hard time getting everything, she said, and how she ended up in the cemetery. John only remarked that her friend was probably in on it, and Bobby could really help. He's very outgoing and can get information from even a scout. John, on the other hand, told her about Amy. When I met her, she already had Bobby. I fell in love, got coded and didn't drink until the day she died. You know, if you're Amy's sister, I'd like you to take Bobby. He's your nephew after all. And out Emily raised her eyebrows. Sister-nephew. She suddenly realized that she wasn't just talking about a girl who looked like her. For some reason, that thought didn't immediately occur to her, but really because the birthmark was in the same place. So maybe a sister then. So Bobby's maybe related to me. Yeah, you're right. We need to figure this out. If that's the case, I'll take him, but only on the condition that you hang in there and live a normal life, Emily mouthed. John invited Emily into the house. She stepped inside. It was cleaned up. Only the table was left with traces of last night's libations. You must be sick, huh? You've been poisoned, you pale thing. You're like a greaseball. You should go to the hospital for a checkup once in a while. Do you vomit all the time? I'll pour you some brine and you'll be fine. The bearded man opened the refrigerator. Inside was a lonely pot, half a loaf of bread. I could see why the boy was going to the graves. Let me make some soup. Do you know how sure I can do anything? There was a chicken leg in the freezer. The only thing missing was an onion, but the soup was good without it. Emily put in more carrots. When Bobby returned, there was a hot first course waiting for him. He was surprised that Emily got along with his stepfather. He hadn't told him about the fact that the guest might be his mother's sister. The boy had only seen the picture a couple times, so he didn't catch the resemblance himself. I brought you a newspaper. Take it, read it. It's on page 5. I couldn't find out anything else. Evil people live in your rich neighborhood. They wouldn't even let me in the front door. But the neighbor said a friend of mine lives in my apartment. I signed it over to her. It's an inheritance. I opened the paper. There was an obituary with my picture on it. The cause of death was a heart attack, and at 30 years old. That's highly questionable. I had a lot of things to figure out. I've probably never had so much uncertainty in my life, and Emily felt alive in the soup. Bobby dozed off, content, satisfied. She had sworn to herself when she left their house that she would come back for the boy, even if he was nothing to her. But she needed to figure out what had happened. Emily made her way to the city, walked to her apartment. John gave her Iris's old jacket that had been hanging in their closet for years. She couldn't bear to throw it away. Emily felt so strong in that jacket, like her sister was holding her hand. Standing at the door of Emily's apartment, I threw off my jacket. She rang the doorbell. When Jessica opened it for her, appearing on the doorstep in her robe and her favorite doggy slippers, not standing in front of her in a black funeral dress and staring menacingly into her eyes. Jessica pressed her hand to her lips. Oh my God, it's you. You're that question again. I've heard that somewhere before. Emily's mind raced.
You poisoned me? And took my money for yourself? What kind of Emily didn't have time to finish the swear word that was begging to come out because Jessica started crying? I didn't do anything. I mean, I did, but I was hypnotized. Remember that fortune teller? She turned out to be a con artist. I didn't realize what I was doing, and she compelled me. Compelled you to sign over everything I owned to herself, forge signatures.
Emily asked. Jessica sounded sincere. I've been trying all day today to remember what was in that thermos. She was the one who gave it to me. I didn't want to. I realize now what I've done, and it makes me feel so nasty. Emily, honey, I'm sorry. I was hypnotized. Do you have to believe me? Emily walked into her apartment. Jessica cried as she told how the fortune teller looked her in the eye, how she taught her what to do. She said that after Emily passed out, Jessica had taken her to the cemetery and asked to bury her. The caretaker was greedy for money. He reeked of alcohol. Jessica gave him a good sum of money, and he said it would be done in the best way. He drove himself to the funeral parlor to pick up the coffin. She was afraid to stay there, so she just left her friend without even waiting for the funeral. She was still alive when they put her in the coffin, but apparently she was too lazy to dig deep, especially since the money was weighing on her pocket. I was very thirsty. They buried her in the spot Jessica had indicated. Then she put an ad in the local paper, just to clear her conscience. And that was it. Body buried. Paperwork's forged. What I don't understand is why the fortune teller made you sign it over to yourself. What's in it for her? She had to come to me to give me half of the fortune. That's what she said. I waited for her. She made me believe that I owed her, that it had to be this way, you know? I'm terrified myself. Her hypnosis is getting weaker now. I guess it's because I saw you. I'm so glad you're alive. Jessica suddenly grabbed her jacket from the coat rack and tried to walk to the door. At that moment, the police officers entered. Going far, Lady Emily stopped by the station with her story and told the story to the investigator. He was extremely surprised, sympathized with her, and told her to go home, hide from the criminal, and wait for the operatives. Jessica was arrested, so it was the fortune teller. But at the interrogation, it quickly became clear that the fortune teller first heard about all this. However, she told another funny story. Jessica had paid her to make Emily feel guilty. And I knew right away that the man was alive, she said. Jessica found another way out. Blamed it on Michael. Turns out Emily's ex-husband wasn't dead. The boat accident was faked. He'd been living in the city and dating Jessica the whole time. He had huge debts, which is why he decided to fake his suicide. He and Jessica had been having an affair for a long time. She was terribly jealous of her friend and decided to steal away the man she loved. Jessica wondered why some people get everything and others nothing. So she decided to even the score somehow. She helped Michael fake a suicide, and his debts turned out to be Emily's problem. She was surprised. She didn't know anything about the debts, but she paid them. She wanted to leave only good things in her loved one's memory. "You pulled me out of the noose," Emily said bitterly. "I was wrong to show weakness. I regretted it so much later. Michael came back to life quietly and inherited everything. But you were alive and whining all the time about how much he loved you and how you loved him. And the truth was, he didn't love you. Michael was always mine." "You didn't get everything," her best friend's words horrified Emily. How jealous she must have been of her all this time, to the point of poisoning her and burying her alive. But the worst part was that Michael was an accomplice. He helped carry Emily's body out when she had already taken the poison. When she found out, she couldn't help but cry. It was painful, cold, lonely. There was no one she could trust. The police assured her that Jessica and Michael would get real jail time for what they'd done. Emily hired a good lawyer. She was scared. She wanted these people to stay where they couldn't hurt her for a long time. The newspapers were full of headlines. "Risen heiress punishes her killers." Emily agreed to be interviewed by one publication. The others hyped their versions. It was funny to read, but all her thoughts now were not about what had happened, but about what she had learned. To check the twin sister version, Emily went to a specialist, and he made some inquiries. "Were you adopted, Emily Igorevna?" "It's true. Your parents went to the clinic several times. Your mother had a unique operation for those years. But the result was the same. Multiple failures of our research institute." She was in despair and even took medication for depression. "Whenever she saw a woman with a stroller on the street, she burst into tears. That's when they took you in. You were born on the same day as your twin sister. Her name, as you know, was Iris Rosen. Iris Janovna was an exact replica of you in appearance, but grew up in a poor family." "Why me? How could my parents separate the twins? Why didn't they give her away?" Emily asked. The truth turned out to be painful. Twins are always born early with less weight. You were more affected. You were much weaker than your sister, malnourished, slow to gain weight. When your mom was discharged, she signed a waiver on one of her daughters, and the doctors already had an order for a baby, a girl. Your adoptive parents wanted a daughter. You grew up in a wealthier, more prosperous family, became a rich heiress, and are still alive. I think your adoption was the best thing that could have happened to you. Your sister was less fortunate. Iris was drinking, in treatment for addiction, all at the age of 16. You're 17. She got clean. She got pregnant. Her parents were dead by then. Bobby, Iris's son, was born at 40 weeks, healthy. She was living a normal life too. She died of a coincidence. She got sick. She started it. An infection set in, came into a crowded hospital. There was no one to help. Her roommate John took care of the baby. She'd given birth to him by another man, from whom we could not find out, but at the alleged time of conception, she worked in a wealthy family as a cleaner. Emily, having received the address of that place, went there in person to find out as much as she could about her late sister. It was getting dark. It was snowing. She parked outside the huge 2-story cottage and approached the gate. It was unlocked. Once inside, Emily walked in high heels across the carved paving stones to the door. She rang the bell. Inside, she heard birds singing. Soon an elderly woman opened the door. "You? Is that you?" It can't be. Emily's mind raced again. She realized that she had now been mistaken for her deceased sister. "Why not? It can. But you're dead. That's what they told me." Jesus, the woman turned pale before her eyes. The life seemed to be coming out of her at that very moment. Just then, a gray-haired, statuesque man with a beautiful and even tan showed up behind her. "My goodness, what do you want here? You've robbed us and come to our doorstep after all these years. What? Are you getting shameful?" Emily shook her head. "That's it. That's enough. I'm not who you think I am. My name is Emily. I'm Iris's twin sister who used to work for you, and I've come to learn the truth about my sister and my nephew. Iris has a child, but she wasn't pregnant when she worked here. Come in." God, you look just like her, the man lamented. His name was Edward Paul Gray, and his wife's name was Anastasia Victoria Gray. The house was beautiful, but uncomfortable, as if it were fashionable. It was more like a museum than a place to live. There were pictures everywhere of a handsome, dark-haired man, apparently their son. I was so scared. I'm still not comfortable, Anastasia Victoria said. Why were you scared? Michael squinted. Yes, Anastasia. Did you think Iris had come back to steal something again? Her husband looked at her with disbelief and incomprehension. She sighed. Okay, I'll tell it like it is. This secret is weighing on me, too heavy a burden. I can't carry it anymore. Your sister worked for us, and she didn't steal anything. I'm the one who talked to her. But I wasn't going to go to the police. I just needed her to leave our son Eli alone. He's too trusting. She twisted him around and started lying about being pregnant. No offense, but your sister wasn't a very nice person. Michael was hurt by her words. He felt there was something wrong with this story. You talk bad about my sister, and she's not a very nice person. Was she pregnant? Edward Paul frowned. She lied to me. I'm sure she did. And I took action, threatened her that if she told Eli about the baby, I'd put her in jail. The baby would be taken away from her. She didn't like the idea. Of course, she shut up and left. Have you been to her place, gone to see her? My husband asked me. Yes, my conscience was bothering me. I wanted to see what the child looked like. But they told me that Iris was dead and her son was living with his father. So I was right. All she wanted was a stranger's baby to tie our Eli to her. We're wealthy. Her family is, I'm sorry, penniless. And Eli is infertile. That was recently discovered. Really, since he was young, Edward added. Yes, he's married now, but they don't have children. So I did the right thing. Michael stood up. I'll bring Iris's son over here, and you can look at him. If that kid in the picture is your kid, they do look alike. Bobby's living with his stepfather now. He took Iris in with his son, but he's not his father. Michael walked away, leaving the door open behind him. He was annoyed at the way these people were talking about his sister. How could this woman know whose child Iris was carrying? Already at the gate, Emily ran into a man, the same man who was in all the pictures in the house. Hello, Emily said. The man was stunned. A tear rolled down his cheek from his eye. It's you. It's you. I've been looking for you. They told me you were gone. Oh my God. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly against him that her breath caught. I'm sorry, Eli, Emily began. She realized that she had called him by his name, that she was speaking to him in her voice, and it wasn't helping her explain her. Where on earth have you been? Why did my friend say you were buried in the town cemetery? I never dared to find the grave. Apparently you weren't there. Well, it happens. And the date of birth matches, Michael said. No, she's really dead. And I'm her sister Emily, she replied, and told him how she and her sister were separated. Ellie proved to be such a good conversationalist that she wanted to open up fully. She recounted how she woke up in the middle of a graveyard and how a boy, his son, had saved her. Told of what she had just learned at his parents' house. Eli listened to her for the first time, looking into her eyes and not wanting to let go. They stood outside his house, not even noticing how nervous his mother was. She kept pulling back the curtain. Seeing Emily made her uneasy again. It had only been a year since she'd managed to marry her precious son to a woman who suited him in every way. Anastasia Victoria Gray had chosen Eli to marry her best friend's daughter, Sarah. Sarah was a high society girl. Always impeccable looking, she knew 4 languages, but she couldn't cook at all. She was arrogant and cold. She was only interested in her job, fashion shows and stupid TV shows. Eli didn't even want to talk to her, but his mother persuaded him to get to know the girl better. Everything pressed on the fact that her father had died, that she was traumatized. That's why she was closed off. Sarah, Eli realized, was just cold and empty. He didn't see any warmth in her, didn't see anything to draw him in. But their parents were persistent. Eli and Sarah began to see each other often. They went to the theater, to the opera. Eli would have preferred something simpler. For example, he was forced to go to plays in a suit, trying to think of something clever to say after Sarah and her abstruse friends discussed the acting and the integrity of the production. He was frankly bored and didn't know how to let loose, how to escape. Eli and Sarah had a lavish, pompous wedding like she had always dreamed of. He was unhappy, and his mother saw it, but she clenched her teeth and said, "This life suits you, Sarah," wasn't suited to marriage at all. They moved into a new apartment downtown. They had everything they needed to be happy, except the most important thing.
Eli began to insist on children, and Sarah said she didn't want any. When Ely asked why she married him in the first place if she didn't want a family, his wife softened, but all attempts to conceive failed. They both got tested and found out that Ely was infertile. His parents were ready to send their son abroad, only for him to please them with grandchildren, but Sarah took him to her doctors.
She said she knew the best specialists. They all confirmed that Eli was infertile. It was a blow to him. He withdrew into himself. Marriage seemed like a mistake. Drowning in all these troubling thoughts, Eli arrived at his parents' house that evening. He got out of the car and saw her inside. Everything seemed to shrink. Everything turned upside down for a moment. He felt like he was the same person he'd been before. Eli talked about how he'd met her sister. Iris had taken a job with them when he had just returned from overseas. She was so beautiful that she didn't even need makeup. Emily had a short haircut, and Iris had a waist-length braid. He saw her and couldn't believe his eyes. Such a beauty dusting their place. It turned out that Iris was a great conversationalist, loved Brodsky, Hitchcock, and loved the same things he did. She knew the places in town that made their favorite shawarma with a unique recipe. They would walk around the city at night on foot. She didn't care that he had a car. She loved to walk on her own, to move, and she had accustomed him to it. After their walks together, Eli felt a pleasant fatigue in his legs. He would fall on his bed and fall asleep like a baby. They were just friends, but they couldn't tear themselves away from each other. They talked nonstop, as if they couldn't get enough of each other. She was the only one who made him feel alive. When Eli dared to kiss her, he expected her to push him away. He was nervous, afraid of losing her, but she responded to the kiss by pressing herself against him. Their affair lasted only a few months. Then his mother found out about it and claimed Iris had stolen her son from her. She would have denied it, but she nodded, apologized shamefully, and left their home for good. Of course, Eli followed her. He found her, but Iris refused to speak to him. "Your mom did it. She just confessed it to me. I was confused and scared when I saw you. She'll tell you herself, apparently." "And I have to go," Emily said after finishing his story. "I'll see you around." He realized there was a completely different person standing in front of him, but he couldn't help himself as he looked at her. He saw Iris, yes, and talking to Emily was just as easy and pleasant. It was hard to separate the two for himself, but still, it was necessary. After all, they were two different people. "I'm bringing her son here." "I think he's yours." "Eli, no. I can't have children. You need to talk to your mom." "I think you'll learn a lot today." Emily left and Eli went to his parents' house. The conversation was hard. He was angry, grabbing his head, crying. His father and mother hadn't expected this reaction. "Mom, what has she given up to you?" "Johnson isn't a father. She's a redneck, a servant. She's stupid." "Not our level indeed." Eli sank tiredly onto the couch. "She was better than all of us. Better than all of us. I loved her, and now she's dead. And if the baby is mine, I will never forgive you," Eli said as he looked his mother in the eyes and walked away. He didn't know when Emily was coming over. They canceled all business appointments and had been waiting in his car outside his parents' house for her since 8:00. "Why are you sitting here? My mother got divorced. Why are you doing this to her? You know how she is. She always wants the best. She separated me from a woman who was pregnant. If Iris said the baby was mine, then it was mine. I have no doubt about that. It turns out my mother separated me from my child, broke my life. And if Emily hadn't found us, I never would have known I had a son at all." His words were bitterly true. His father nodded. "I didn't expect her to do that either. I mean, she always wanted grandchildren, didn't she? So what? That the girl was poor. I liked Iris, but I thought she really stole," he said. "Anastasia convinced us all of that and intimidated the girl, so she never showed up on our doorstep again. That's how you live with someone for so many years and don't even know what they're capable of."
Toward evening, Iris returned, got out of the car, and Bobby walked beside her. Eli walked over to the boy. My God, the way he was staring at him. Bobby has her nose. And the rest of him is mine. He's a carbon copy of me. I was fair-haired and easygoing when I was a kid, too.
Eli looked at Emily. She was wearing a long black coat, white snowflakes laying on her short hair. Her eyes looked with tenderness. He still saw her as his love, but he was already aware that she was different, and this did not upset him. On the contrary, he wanted to get to know her better. "We should take a test," Emily said. "I don't even know where they do those tests. I've looked into it. If you want, they'll take us in right now. I just want to say right off the bat that Bobby will be living with me. He doesn't know you at all. And I won't trust him to your mother, I'm sorry." Eli was confused. They both realized that a father would have every right to his son. But after what his mom had done, he didn't argue. Okay, just let's go over to my place. I want to show him to his grandmother, Eli said. The boy, who had been standing still all this time, suddenly asked, "So you're my daddy, are you? I don't get it." Eli was dumbfounded. "I knew your mom well. You didn't say anything to him?" Eli asked Emily. The woman shook her head. "We have a lot to tell you. But first, I want a woman to see you. She'll probably cry." "You don't freak out. It's necessary," Eli said. He winked at Bobby and the three of them went into the house. When Anastasia saw the boy, she was stunned. Ellie's father immediately walked over to the child and extended his hand to him. "Well, hello there. You can call me grandfather," he said. "All right. And you call me Bobby? That's what everybody calls me." "That's a funny name you have," the boy replied. Anastasia walked over to the child, knelt down, and cried. She realized that the boy was an exact replica of Eli. There wasn't even any need for a test. Anastasia realized it all at once. Guilt came over her in such a way that she cried and couldn't stop. That's it. That's enough. Take her away," Eli asked his father. He took his wife upstairs, and the trio went to take a DNA test. Afterward, they went to a cafe where they ate ice cream. Eli occasionally wiped away tears. When Bobby talked about the delicious candy he picked up at the cemetery, Eli said, "I'll never forgive her." Emily understood, and she kind of felt sorry for his mom. She had done such a thing, and now she would have to accept the consequences of her deed. Bobby was now an adult and was starting to ask questions until they answered them, going off topic. Eli and Emily agreed that they would tell the boy everything once the DNA test was ready. When it came time to part ways, Eli realized he didn't want to leave. "How am I going to leave him now?" he asked Emily, completely confused. "I just took him away from his drinking stepfather. He promised me he'd get codependent, but I don't believe it. The boy needs to realize everything, get used to it. Besides, I've got a big shaggy dog at home right now. Let me take it for a walk," Eli begged. He couldn't let them go. Had he just gained a son now? Even if it turned out that Bobby wasn't his own, he was still Iris's child, and that was very meaningful to him. "Okay, come with us." Emily realized that Eli didn't want to break up. Except with whom? With her or with the baby? Or still with the Iris he saw in her and Bobby? Probably all of them. Emily was ashamed to realize that she liked Eli a lot, and she thought her sister would have approved of their union. Those thoughts flashed through her mind against her will. She didn't want to think it, but the feelings arose in her on their own. She had fallen in love with Eli as early as yesterday, when she saw how he had reacted to her, and how much he loved Iris. He wasn't like his mother. There was decency in him. He was the victim in this situation. So was Bobby. So was Iris. And girls separated as children who never saw each other for the rest of their lives could well be considered victims too. But there was no bringing their parents back. There was no one left to ask questions. Iris was gone too. There's only Bobby to tell Eli a joke. There's Eli, secretly wiping away tears as he looks at the baby. Emily realized that he would have stayed asleep on the doorstep just to be near his son. They made their way to her apartment. Bobby and Emily began to clean up. Buddy made a mess. Bobby scolded him and scratched his head. He understood. You could see it in his intelligent eyes. Eli walked Buddy for almost an hour. During that time, Emily made dinner. "You know, I feel like you guys are my mom and dad. It's like we have a family," Bobby said to Emily. She wanted terribly badly to tell the boy who she was to him, but she waited for the test result. For some reason, she was scared to talk about it. He'd be sitting in his new room. "I'll go set him up at his new school tomorrow, and I'll quietly tell him that his mom was my sister," Emily told Leo. "Okay, if you want, you can stay at my place. It's a comfy couch," she offered. "Can I? I hate to leave terribly, but that's the way it's going to be tomorrow. You see, I can't leave him now, and neither can I leave you. It's as if I were tied to you. You're supposed to be a wife," she smiled. "Our marriage is a sham, and Eli is my son, so she lied to me. She took me to her doctors, telling me I was infertile. Then one day I found birth control pills on her. She said it was a friend's pills, but I guess I just got caught. We have a really bad relationship. I never loved her, but that doesn't change the fact that you're married. Let me stay because of him. I'll work out my marital status. We'll get back to this conversation." Emily bed Eli on the couch.
She didn't think he was serious. But the very next day, Michael did file for divorce. He didn't even wait for the test results.
"What were you missing?" Iris asked him. She was angry. "Honesty, kids, a wife, and borscht. I'm a husband. Don't you feel like a wife? Running around to your parties, your bohemian parties that make me sick. I want to be at home, watching movies at night. I want the comforts of home. I want to hug my wife. raise my kids, be needed. Do you realize you're married? Iris threw the glass at the wall and didn't answer him. You lied to me that I was infertile, Michael asked. Yes, because I'm not going to ruin my figure for the sake of a schnook, and I did the abortion for you. So get out. I don't care about you, she said venomously. That was the end of their marriage. That evening, after picking up the lab report, Michael walked up the stairs and rang the doorbell. Emily opened it for him. She was wearing no makeup and a house robe. I thought you'd call. Did something happen? She asked. I filed for divorce, and I'm also Bobby's father. A kid showed up behind me. What? I'm your daddy. Michael went downstairs and hugged his son. He and Emily told him the whole truth. Michael had several pictures of Iris. Finally, the boy had a picture of his mom. Emily told her side of the story. That same night, Michael got up the courage to tell her that he wanted to be with them. I know it's rash, but I can't help it. I'm drawn to you. I want to be part of the family since he's my son. Let's raise him together. Let's just try it. Do you want to move in with me? You have a wife, right? No, I have my own apartment. But it's a little far from here. No, it's okay. Bobby just started a new school. You don't have to push him again. I have a big apartment. There's plenty of room for everyone. Stay, the couch is all yours. On one condition, Emily looked at him seriously. What's that? You'll go out with Buddy? Michael laughed. Aren't you a dog person? I am. I was going to get a bald cat on Friday, but now I don't know. At first, Michael flatly refused to talk to his mother and would not show her his grandson. Only Grandpa Edward, who loved Bobby to bits, came to visit. Anastasia could not get through to her son, so one day she came to her mother. She apologized, saying that she repented. Emily and Eli decided to give the grandmother a trial to her grandson. She came to visit them and told them what she had done to his mom. Bobby listened to her with a serious look. I'm sorry, for God's sake. I want to hang out with you so badly. You're my only grandchild, she said. Okay, he smiled and hugged her. Will you forgive me? Grandma repeated. It's not like you killed anyone, and I don't have many grandmothers to throw around, Bobby replied. Eli, following his son's example, also softened. A year later, when the twins were born, Anastasia helped with them and taught the young mom the finer points of infant care. They became a real family. John did get codependent and became an assistant at a rehab clinic for addicts. Bobby sometimes comes to visit him, and there is a new monument in the cemetery. Emily ordered a beautiful headstone for her sister next to the grave that Jessica and Michael made for her. She kept it in memory of what had happened, and if it hadn't been for their horrible act, she would never have found her happiness.